Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the fifth meeting of the Planning and Environment Committee. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489. 2425. And I'd like to ask if there are any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Councillor Squire. Thank you. I have 2.4 will be pulled from the consent item. I have asked that the Urban Forest Health Oak Wilt be pulled for a quick presentation by staff as well, so that's 2.6. And I would like to pull 2.3, the application, 2.4, the application for the second phase of Eagle Ridge as well. And I'd like to speak to that. Are there any other consent items that the committee would like to pull? I see none. So that's 2.4, 2.5, and 2.6. I need a motion for the rest of the items. Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Squire.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Councillor Cassidy to take over the chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can just chair from here, if that's okay. So I'll go to item 2.4 and Councillor Hopkins, Madam Chair, I believe you have pulled that.
Thank you very much. And this application is in Ward 9, and it is an application that I have been working with the Stormwater Management group, as well as a number of the neighbors in the area, on how the groundwater will be monitored and how it affects the neighbors with this development. And I do have a couple questions that I would like to ask of staff about the groundwater monitoring program and the contingency plan. So as we move forward with this development, I know it is recognized in the Easter seals in the hydrological works, which is 25.10. If you go to number 41, Easter seals on Ontario Wood Eden Camp has been recognized, but I also know there's another neighbor on Oxford there who has been, who is on a well and has been part of the monitoring program for the past couple of years. And I'm just wondering if staff could speak to how long the monitoring will take place, or will it take place, and what is the contingency plan, because there has been one. And I'd also like to just bring to everyone's attention the need for that monitoring is very important when it comes to the dewatering, especially on the Trip C, which is a pretty big pond.
Mr. Yeoman, go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. This was, of course, a very important matter that was raised when this file came for draft plan approval, if you recall, probably about a year ago. The concerns over the wells in relation to the neighbors and also the Easter Seals camp. That's why you're seeing these monitoring provisions here. So as you can see, the monitoring is supposed to occur as part of the development. So a monitoring plan is to be put together. A contingency plan would be part of the monitoring plan as well. So if it were to be determined that the wells were failing, then we would take action to actually backstop the water supply for the residents per the recommendations that are in the plan. You can see it's noted in the clauses, the agreement conditions, about a 2 years post 90% of build out as how long the monitoring is going to last as well. And then we think that would be sufficient to address any needs that would come up.
Thank you. So the 2 years would start after the development, or would it start now?
Through the chair, so the monitoring would commence when development starts to proceed, and so it would last until 2 years after 90% of build out occurs with the subdivision.
Thank you for that. I do have another question about the, I guess, the mapping of the Thames Valley plan and how the trails are going to work within the ESA or around the ESA. And I know that there was no mapping provided on the plan that we already have. I don't know if there's anyone here from Parks that can speak to that, but I do have a question about how the trails will work in that area, and in particular, the buffering, how that buffering will work along the ESA. So I'm not sure if anyone here is able to speak to that.
Through the chair, I can give a global answer. Mr. Pompilli might be able to supplement from here. So you're correct, the trails aren't specifically identified on the plan. They would have been considered through the EIS that was done as part of the plan, as part of the review that occurred. I can't speak to any specifics, unfortunately. I don't know if he can as well. I'll yield to him.
At this time, I don't have specifics. I know it's ongoing, and we've had. Well, I can follow up with some specific mapping to you between now and the next council meeting.
I'd appreciate that, because I guess this leads into my next question too, about the comments that were provided by EPAC with the to the EIS, and so where is the follow-up to that, the final EIS? I'm not sure if, where do we see that, or does that ever go back to EPAC?
Is that Mr. Yeoman again?
Through the chair, so we do report out, it's not in the special provisions report, but when we have our draft plan reports, we do report out the comments and the feedback that's received from EPAC's submission. That information is provided to EPAC. There's not another meeting that reconvenes with EPAC, but the applicant is required to address the comments that are provided, and it informs the staff recommendation that comes before you.
Okay, so there is a final report then?
Through the chair, yes, there is, and you'll see conditions in your subdivision agreements that speak to that. So if there are outstanding matters from the EIS, whether it be monitoring or other matters that have to be considered, we'll always have a clause related to that finds its way into the subdivision agreement that has to be fulfilled before the developer can receive conditional clearance.
And I have one last question. This is the Trip C is a pretty big project. In fact, I would think it's probably one of the largest swim ponds that the city has undertaken. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but this whole area there's a lot of water happening. And I know it's been a conversation for a number of years. And one of the questions that still remains is the winter maintenance protocols. How are we ensuring that, that we are following those winter protocols? I know we refer to it in the report, but where is the monitoring that will continue?
Through the chair, so you're correct. On
25.7, sorry.
Yes, sir. Page 37, clause number 18 speaks to the winter maintenance protocol that's required to be put together for the applicant. We are, of course, very mindful of Trip C. It is a very unique system in the city, both from a stormwater and natural heritage perspective as well. The protocol will be reviewed by staff. It'll also be part of the clearance of conditions that occur at the end of the approvals process as well. We go through each of the conditions that are in the subdivision agreement before we provide final approval.
Thank you.
So Councillor Hopkins, at this time, would you like to take the chair back, or did you want to move this item?
I would like to move this item. I know this has been an ongoing project, lots of things to consider here, but I really do appreciate the responses. I think they're important to understand how the monitoring is going to work as we move forward, in particular with the neighbors that surround this area.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments from committee? And do we have a second? Councillor Helmer is seconding that motion, and we can vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
And Madam Chair, at this moment, I will return the chair to you.
Thank you. I guess we're just moving on to the next item that was pulled by the Urban Forest Health, the oak wilt. And I know staff has a quick presentation. I hope the committee is okay with accepting the presentation. This is important for the education piece.
Madam Chair, Councillor Squire also pulled 2.5, so did you want to vote on that first?
Yes. I guess we'll do 2.5 while you're setting up. And this is the application on 379 Sunningdale Road West.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 3 with 1 recused.
And now we have a quick presentation by Jillian Spence on the Urban Forest Health, the oak wilt. Welcome.
Here we go. Thank you. I'm Jillian Spence. I'm the manager of urban forestry. Thank you for allowing me to do this presentation. It's a great opportunity to educate and inform people about an emerging forest health threat called oak wilt. Oak wilt is a vascular disease of oak trees. It's caused by a fungus that blocks the vascular system in trees, and that's the system that circulates food and nutrients throughout the tree. There's currently no cure for oak wilt, and there's no confirmed cases in Canada. Oak wilt has spread throughout the Midwest in the United States. It was confirmed in Wisconsin in 1942, but there's a lot of historical records that date back from the 1890s of oak wilt along the Appalachian Mountains. Why I'm here today talking to you is because oak wilt was confirmed on Bell Island in 2016, 600 meters from a Canadian shore and 150 kilometers from us here in London. Oak wilt spreads above ground and below ground. Above ground, it's spread by a beetle moving the fungus from infected trees to healthy trees, and it also spreads below ground by interconnected root systems. Oak wilt is very symptomatic, very typical looking in the landscape. You can see in this picture that all the trees in this picture are green, and then there's a flagging brown oak tree. I normally say it's a tree that looks like it's a fall in the summer. So this disease happens very quickly in early summer. It starts from the top of the tree down through the major branches, and eventually the entire tree is flagging brown. What else is very symptomatic of it is that it'll lose its leaves very early in the summer. So you can see that the grass is still very green, but there's brown leaves that have fallen. And this is how you diagnose if your tree in fact does have oak wilt. These are the signs of the fungus, which are called pressure pads. They grow underneath the inner bark of the tree, and as they grow, they put pressure on the outer bark, and vertical cracks will form. And what's very typical is that this smells very much like juicy fruit gum or cotton candy. So we're trying to do as much education and outreach and bringing awareness to folks so that we can be in the front line of early detection. That's one of the best ways to limit the spread of oak wilt. We're reaching out to a lot of regional partners as far as coordinating workshops and also being on the edge of doing research with the CFIA. In the spring, we'll be releasing an oak wilt awareness campaign to coincide with camping season, so to highlight the risks of moving firewood during camping season and cottage season. We've also updated our city website, so if Londoners want more information about oak wilt, we have a ton of information here, or they can always contact us if they have any questions. And what we're currently doing within this city, we're doing a lot of the best management practices around oak wilt. We've refrained from pruning oak trees between the months of April and August, when the beetle is active. We've trained a lot of our city staff to be aware of the symptoms and signs. We have a person on staff that holds an oak wilt qualification. And we're updating our tree inventory to make sure we have a lot of accurate information of where our oak trees are. We also want to continue to support folks to plant trees. So we have a very aggressive tree me program, and also our National Forest Week, where we give trees away to ensure that we're continuing to diversify our forest. What Londoners can do, again, we're really hoping that folks can attend a public information center or a public information session that we're planning on holding this spring. Learn to identify what an oak tree looks like and the symptoms of oak wilt, and also to follow best practices, such as what the city currently is doing, is reducing pruning from April to August, dispose of debris very quickly, be on the outlook for very weird things that are happening with your trees, if there's sudden leaf drop or leaf color in the summer, and contact an arborist if you have any major concerns. The main thing we want to stress to people is not to move firewood, and this is the case not only with oak wilt, but also with emerald ash borer, Asian longhorn beetle, a lot of the invasive pests we see that have been impacting our urban forest. They may not otherwise have gotten into a remote area, but what's happening is that people are moving firewood from an infested location to a healthy, uninfested location, and it's causing significant problems, especially in the example in Michigan. The oak wilt can remain on logs for up to 2 years. Another thing that Londoners can do is that if they suspect oak wilt, is to report it to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, or also report it to us, and we'll make sure that it gets looked at. And then there's lots of information that's available on websites. Some of the really good ones out there, in addition to the City of London's, are the Invasive Species Center. They're a charity nonprofit. And Forest Invasives, they have a really great toolkit on helping homeowners and also municipalities with managing different types of invasive plants, and have highlighted oak wilt. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Let's see. Councillor, Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. Through the chair, thanks for the presentation. It's kind of depressing, honestly, but in terms of what kind of changes we might need to make locally in anticipation of the eventual arrival of the oak wilt. Does this affect anything with our tree planting strategy? Are we going to make some changes about what we're going to plant in the boulevards, for example, to try and avoid this being an even more expensive problem down the road?
Yes, through the chair. We are currently decreasing the types of red oak tree family type trees that we're planting. This fungus impacts white oaks and red oaks differently. We're still planting the white oak species, which are bur oaks, white oaks, and but decreasing the amount of red oaks we're planting, which are pin oaks, scarlet oaks, those types of things. So we are adjusting our contractual tree planting numbers.
Thank you. I think that's a smart thing that'll pay off down the road, and we probably won't even notice because it's going to be a problem that doesn't happen rather than a problem that does happen. We had previously a report about the Asian Longhorn beetle. We're obviously familiar with the emerald ash borer. There's fewer and fewer trees that seem to be without their own pests or infestations or pathogens that are going to kill all of those trees eventually. So in terms of the migration of these things throughout North America, are we expecting to see, whether it's this one or another one, more and more of these things as they kind of migrate northeast through North America? Because we had a report about the planting strategy not that long ago showing, look, this is where we expect temperatures to be going. This is where we expect the migration of the species, like tree species, to be going. And there was some discussion about assisted migration, of getting in things that are not native now, but that will be as they move in on their own. Is there anything there that we need to be aware of in terms of like what trees are left that don't have these threats?
Yeah, through the chair. Yes, so we're absolutely considering those types of issues, really big picture concerns. This specific pest, we actually, the history of it is pretty, it's kind of an anomaly. We actually think it might be native. And the beetle that transports it is actually native too. So we think it might be a native pest that has always been around in North America, and it's just making its way across different boundaries. This one in particular, we think that it's been helped along by people and moving firewood and people practices where it originally, they think it originally started in Texas. So maybe not so much weather related, but people moving. And we are looking at more southern types of species, especially conifers that would do better in our climate because of assisted migration and climate movement.
Last question for now. I expect we're going to be talking about it again, which is unfortunate. But in terms of border controls around the movement of firewood, I know within our borders, there's not a whole lot we can do about the movement of firewood. But in terms of controlling the movement of firewood from the United States into Canada, what, if anything, is the federal government doing about that?
Through the chair. I think that's being taken pretty seriously, especially with the example that happened on Bell Island. It completely changed the landscape of that park. It's pretty devastated. So there's a huge push for burn it where you buy it, really educating people around the negative impacts that moving firewood has. There's been a lot of research that the CFIA has put in place at different border points for doing inspections. You're still allowed to move firewood, but they want to see it without the bark on it or things like that. But it's normally somebody that has wood in their backyard that's going to move it to the camp, to their cottage for the weekend, that may be inadvertently moving wood with a pest or disease on it.
Thank you for those questions. And if I may, just a quick follow-up to, I know there's no cure for this, but are there, do we have an idea when we can expect it to be in this area, or is it just waiting to see what happens? Do we know it's going to be here? I know it's not here yet, but what is the reality, I guess, what we can expect?
Through the chair, that's a tough one. Again, this has been mainly a people movement type of pest. It's made its way from Texas east to when I was living in Virginia in 2009. We didn't think it was going to ever get to Virginia from Michigan, and it showed up within a year. So, and it was because people moving firewood. So it's tough. I think that's why we really want to be on the first line of defense. The city of Windsor had a very aggressive educational awareness campaign, Sarnia, and then London. We really want to be educating folks, early detection, making folks aware of what they can do to make sure that, you know, we limit it, and if it does get here, that we're able to identify it very quickly.
Thank you for that. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So if this has always been around, is there, and I know from the report that white oaks tend to not take it as hard as red oaks, but so how, do they have any red oaks left in Texas? Is there any kind of natural defense mechanism in these trees that some can fight it off?
Through the chair. There has been a lot of research around oak wilt. So this is a tiny bit different than emerald ash borer that, you know, kind of hit us really hard. We were maybe kind of sitting back a little bit, not really knowing what to expect. Oak wilt's been kicking around for a long time in Texas. They have a lot of research around root pruning that really helps, like, which basically is severing the roots between infected trees, making pressure compression trenches so that it doesn't get into healthy areas. So that has been helpful. It's preventative, it's costly. And then they also have in the States, of course, a pesticide that they're able to inject into the tree that has some preventative maintenance or preventative measures against oak wilt that's not currently approved here in Canada.
So one final question. Ratio of white oaks to red oaks here in London, do you have an idea of how many we have of each type of tree?
Yeah, through the chair. Based on our U4 study completed in 2008, we have about, for a stem count, not a canopy cover percentage, a stem count of about 140,000 oak trees. Half of them are equally split between white and red. And on city-owned property, we have about 30,000 oak trees, with about 20,000 of them being red and 10 being white. So that's why we're increasing our white oak diversity.
Thank you, Councillor Cassidy, and thank you, Ms. Spence. I think all Londoners, the education piece, the more we know and understand this, the better off we will be. So thank you. Moving on now to the scheduled items, we have. Sorry, I'm trying to get ahead of myself. We need a mover in Councillor Cassidy and a seconder, Councillor Squire.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
And moving on to the scheduled items now, we have two delegation requests that have been accepted by the committee. And if I could have Mr. Kirkness speak to 131 King Street. Welcome, Mr. Kirkness. And you do have the 5 minutes.
Madam Chair and council members, thank you very much for accepting me as a delegation. We're talking about 131 King West. Michael Pease has provided quite a good report of kind of the facts as he was asked to do at the last meeting. I just wanted to run through these few slides to show you the changes. Now, originally we were zoned for 30 stories and 266 units. And the building, the east elevation, if you're looking at it from the Richmond Street side, kind of looked, the original building is on the left and the current building is on the right. And so we had agreed with staff that 30 stories and 266 units was fine, except that they felt the building on the left was too fat. They wanted to, what I call, slenderize it, and so Zed Architecture took it back to their drawing board and did a wonderful job, actually, of using those architectural skills of terracing, projections, recessions, color, texture, and as you can see on the upper left kind of height of the building, the current reduced mass is makes the building look a lot less wide if you're looking at it from the east or west elevations. And so that's the current south elevation, the current west elevation. You can see looking from basically the Talbot Street side. Again, the top right corner has been peeled off and the building's been made more slender. And of course, this is the King Street elevation, which really hasn't changed at all in appearance. What we thought was originally that the 266 units could be accommodated in the slenderized building. We have found out since that it cannot be, in terms of looking at the bedroom count and the average floor area of the units and that sort of thing. We're 11 units short. And so therefore, as the London plan allows us to go 30, may permit up to 35 stories, we did not think it would be a tall order to ask if we could go one more stories and regain those 11 units. And that's kind of why we're here for at least one reason. So the east elevation looks like this. The 30 stories is on the left, the 31 stories is on the right. You can see that there's hardly a noticeable difference. The same goes with the south elevation, 30 stories on the left, 31 stories on the right. Same goes with the west elevation. This is a cross-sectional view which goes to the second point, which deals with one of the bonusable items being public parking. And we are wanting to maintain the 41 spaces of public parking. This was a major significant criteria to meet for the bonusing to be applied in the first place. It's just that we can't bring it in off of York Street. The structure of this building demands that we bring it in off of King Street to make it underground. Be 41 spaces. We kind of feel that it would be more appropriate off of King Street anyway, because that's kind of where the building is oriented, to King Street, 131 King Street. That's where kind of people would go to find parking here, we think. The back door, or the York Street frontage, is really the back door. Most of the tenant parking would come in through there. The servicing would be through there. The loading, the moving in, the moving out would be quite hectic to mix the public's 41 spaces with those spaces. So consequently, we needed to kind of correct that. And so we're trying to ask your permission, hoping you'll give us permission to apply to the Committee of Adjustment to make those two kind of adjustments. And of course, it'll go through a public process. We'll be dealing with staff and the staff report, all those things. But it's kind of a much easier route time-wise, because York would really like to get digging like in March, but April. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? I see none, so we are going to have a motion then to allow the applicant to submit a minor variance to provide the height.
I'll move that.
And I need a seconder. Deputy Mayor Helmer. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. Just want to make sure we get the staff report to be received as well. And I appreciate the quick turnaround on the staff report. I think this is appropriate to have it go to Committee of Adjustment. It would have been I'm sure better in retrospect if all this stuff could have been sorted out before we dealt with the zoning application, but that didn't happen. So here we are. I think it's fine to go into committee of adjustment.
Thank you, and thank you to staff for your report as well. So we will be receiving that and moving the recommendation up to submit a minor variance.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Sorry about that. Next up, Mr. Kirkness, again, you are here with a 5-minute delegation request on 894 Adelaide Street North.
Thank you again, Madam Chair and council members. This is another request to make an application, to gain your permission to make an application to Committee of Adjustment. As you know, we're on Adelaide Street North between Grosvenor and Ross. And this was a small infill rezoning we did, which we had our own public meeting back in 2018. Now, the problem is there's 6 units of an apartment building of 6 units on the site currently, and we were going to add a 9-unit apartment building at the rear. And Michael Pease has, again, provided a very good, original proposal, new proposal kind of thing. So, basically, we know where we are. This is just a photograph looking in the backyard. The bigger one on the upper right is looking at the back of this existing 6-unit apartment building. The one in the lower left is looking to, just turning 180 degrees and pointing into the backyard where the new apartment building was originally proposed. The garage was going to be taken down. And some of those trees, but not all of them, and we were very careful to try and keep as many as we can. So that's kind of the proposal that we came up with. And that required 5-meter side yards for the new apartment building, trying to keep the building in the center of the site and towards the front and a big backyard, and everything was going to be great until we got to the stormwater drainage problem, of which, and that was the elevation, of which we found that we had no defined pipe outlet and the ground material isn't quite, we can't infiltrate sufficiently to be able to go without the defined pipe. Except that the city's policy is that we can use the same impervious area. So we've done that by moving the apartment building more to the site, more just right behind the existing building, as you see in this new proposal on the screen. And then we have 15 parking spaces at the rear. We require 19 space and a quarter per unit, but we think because of public transit service and this part of town and this type of housing that 1 per unit is sufficient. This has allowed us then to have, this is doable from a stormwater management point of view. And we have to do some retaining of the water on the roof of the new structure as well, and it would come out onto Adelaide, as does the existing building. So it's been kind of quite a balance in doing the stormwater management, but we have been able to succeed. The problem is we haven't got the parking that the zoning requires, and we haven't got the northerly side yard that the parking requires. Therefore, we need 2 exceptions to the zoning, which we hope could be minor variances, and that's why we're applying to you. We've also said in our letter that we are, of course, wanting to communicate. We had our own public meeting, and to offer up the continuity, we would wanting to be sending a letter out to the area residents as, again, showing them this new proposal. Of course, the minor variance process is public, so they'd get notice that way as well. But I wanted to assure you that the area residents would be informed and their input sought. So again, the permission to make the application is before you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, Mr. Kirkness? I see none. So committee, we have a report from staff again. Thank you for the report and the information coming to us. Councillor Cassidy?
Thank you. I do have a question. So the reduced side, northern interior side yard setback is requested is 3 meters. What is the side yard setback for the existing building? Because it looks to me like it's a little bit closer than the proposed building.
It would be 6 to 8 feet, as opposed to the 10 feet that we're asking for the new structure.
Deputy Mayor Helmer?
Thank you. I'm not going to comment too much on the substance because if we approve this, it's going to go off to Committee of Adjustment to be dealt with. I will say that I'm glad we put the holding provisions on. I remember stormwater management was a major focus of the discussion when we dealt with this application last year. And there were some people who were pretty convinced that this is not going to work the way it was suggested. And there was the holding provision put on to say, well, we'll make sure that that actually will work before the zoning will kick in. And so I'm glad that, you know, it has prevented something that could have otherwise been a big problem. If we'd built that sort of initial site plan and the stormwater management hadn't worked, the residents would not be happy, I guarantee it. So this is a pretty significant difference, and I'm glad to hear Mr. Kirkness is willing to, of course, engage in the public process if it goes through to site plan. I'm willing to support that at this point because I think it's an appropriate way of handling unexpected development, perhaps foreseeable unexpected, but here we are, and I think that's the only way forward other than waiting out the clock for a long time and nothing happening in the meantime. So.
Thank you for that. And Councillor Squire?
I agree with Councillor Helmer. I actually think this one's a little more challenging from a minor variance point of view than the previous application. So the thing that's weighing on me is this time issue and getting this matter moving ahead. But I think normally it'd be a bit challenging, but I'll support it in this particular case.
Thank you for that. And if the committee will allow me just a follow-up, you did, Mr. Kirkness, say that you will be contacting the community. I know there's going to be a public process through the minor variance, but did you say you would be contacting the community as well with the changes? I just wanted to get clarification.
Yes, the client has given me direction, subject to what's happening at this meeting, to send the plan and the elevation and a letter out to the residents that would receive the Committee of Adjustment minor variance before they receive the minor variance notice.
Thank you for doing that. And I need a motion then to receive the staff report as well as recommending this to go to a minor variance application. Councillor Squire, I would need a seconder from the committee. Do I have a seconder? Deputy Mayor Helmer. Thank you. And thank you very much, Mr. Kirkness. Okay, moving along then to 3.3. It's a public participation meeting on 1820 Canvas Way. It's a draft plan of vacant land condominium. And I guess I would need a motion then to open up the public participation meeting. Councillor Cassidy, and second by Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Thank you. And we have a presentation by Mr. Smith. If you can go ahead.
Thank you. As indicated, this is an application for actually a vacant land condominium. draft plan of condominium for 1820 Canvas Way. The site itself is located up on Sunnydale Road East, just west of Adelaide Street North. It's located at the corner of Canvas Way and Sunnydale Road East. The actual vacant land condominium plan has 20 townhouse dwellings on it, as well as 43 single detached dwellings. So it's essentially a kind of a hybrid of the two forms of housing. So it does provide a mix of housing at this location. This is a part of our plan, indicating through the neighborhood place type is to have these sort of mixed uses up front. Was originally a block in the subdivision that was approved, I want to say 6 years ago. It is now coming forward now to be developed. The application itself actually has gone through, let's go to the picture. It has actually gone through site plan approval, the development agreement's in place, and there is a development agreement also in place. Essentially, they need the vacant land condominium to move forward fairly quickly because they need to actually create and have it registered on title prior to issuing of building permits on these lots for the townhouses. The single families can actually start prior to the full complete, can start prior to the registration after draft approval, but they have to be aware that if anything crosses a lot line, a proposed lot line, that they would have to fix that and put everything on their own lot. There was, through the correspondence for this vacant land condominium, we actually did receive some comments back that were that we can address. One of the biggest ones was the one access onto from the whole of the subdivision right now. As you know, this is currently a building out area. There is a lot of different pieces of the puzzle that need to come forward for it all to function the way that it was intended through our area plan. There's lights at Canvas Way, as always, was requested, the traffic there. There's dirt and noise, and of course, green space and parks, bus stops, temporary sidewalks along the Sunnydale Road, and the estimated time of arrival for the actual widening on Sunnydale Road. Just to take you to the actual plan itself. As noted, there is, through the subdivision process and shown on the hatched line there is a temporary access that does provide for that second emergency access into this subdivision. So if for any reason Canvas Way were to be become unavailable through stuck cars or just plowed or whatever, there is other opportunities to get in through into this subdivision by emergency vehicles at this time. There's water looping through there at this time as well, pending the completion of the subdivision to the east and subdivision to the west. Kleinberg Road will continue through, and there will be numerous accesses along Sunnydale Road and along Adelaide Street North. The other comments were regarding parking, visitor parking on the site. Visitor parking has been, was considered through the site plan application. All parking that's required through the zoning bylaw is provided on site. As noted, these will be single family homes with fairly large frontages, I believe greater than 11 meters. So there are opportunities in which to park along the street inside the neighborhood, just as we would in any other neighborhood. The discussion regarding dirt and noise, obviously we have bylaws that speak to both of those, and also there's also conditions within the draft plan or through the subdivision to make sure that the dust and that are kept down on all streets and prior to the assumption by the city. What else we have here? Bus stops, green space. Both of those were circulated through the subdivision process. Green space has been given and taken by the city at the 5% as required by the Planning Act. So we basically got all the green area we can out of the subdivision already through the previous process. And as this is a block of it, no further parkland dedication is provided at this time. And the bus stop locations also were identified through the subdivision process when and if the time comes that buses are going through the subdivision, those stops will be identified or will be accessed at those times. And what was the last one here? Oh, sorry. Oh yes, and then of course, the big concern was the discussion around the sidewalks along Sunnydale Road East. The difficulty is that Sunnydale Road East is scheduled to be improved. 2027 is basically the full built-out timeline, with it beginning, I believe, or the process is starting before that. One of the big considerations is, as you can see, that green is an Imperial Oil pipeline easement. Works in an Imperial Oil pipeline easement is quite difficult and requires a whole lot of different approvals. And on top of that, and so that would also be coordinated through the actual EA process for the ultimate build out. Canvas Way itself is 2 meters lower than it needs to be. So there is going to be a need for 2 meters worth of fill. So again, through the ultimate build out, that's the issue that can be resolved through at that time. So essentially at this time, there are accesses along Kleinberg going east through the temporary walkway. There are some accesses, or there is some sidewalks along Sunningdale Road South. Right now, there's nothing along the north side, but again, these are typical concerns on non-build-out areas. Once these subdivisions come fully online, we certainly would move forward with the ultimate and final connections and sidewalks at that time. So basically from the actual vacant land condominium application to have these things sold off as individual lots, it meets all the policies intent of both the London plan and the official plan, and it is good planning. Subject to any questions, that's my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Any technical questions from the committee? Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Regarding the parkland dedication of 5%, is that on site? So I know there's a subdivision currently a little bit to the north and the west of this site. And there is some park over there, but of that 5%, will the parkland be in this area, or was it in lieu and to be built somewhere else?
Yeah, no, this subdivision actually is being a block of the subdivision of all those single-family homes to the north. The 5% park we took is the park further to the north, the ESA significant area, as well as there's a public park there with play equipment in it. So that's all part and parcel of the whole of the subdivision, and this is just one block within it.
Good, thank you. And going back to the issue of sidewalks, and the widening of Sunningdale Road. So I kind of keep getting a different date. I had heard 2025. Is the 2027, and this may not be for you, through you, Madam Chair, it may not be for Mr. Smith, it may be for somebody in transportation. But does that date keep moving? Is it kind of a moving target?
Through you, Madam Chair. So you're correct. It's 2025, but it's being considered as part of the GMIS, which is not final yet. So it's being considered, and it could be 2025.
Well, that would be good. Oh, and one final question about sidewalks through you, Madam Chair. Mr. Smith, you mentioned that there are sidewalks to the south. Are they the entire length of Adelaide on the south side, say from Richmond to on Sunningdale from Richmond to Adelaide, or does it stop at some point?
Yes, it does stop at some point. Basically, it stops across the street where the newer townhouses have been built, where that driveway is located at 585, and from there. But there is ability to get through the townhouse site to our multi-use path system, which runs along the park to the west, and that also can carry you down through towards the subdivisions, which is Blackwater and off to Adelaide Street from there as well.
Thank you. Thank you. And is the applicant here or the representative? If you have any comments, please come to the microphone. Welcome.
Hi. No, I have no comments. Everything's good.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And I'd like to go to the public now. If there's anyone, I'll start here on my left. If anyone would like to speak to this application, there are 2 microphones. Please come forward, stating your name and address if you wish. And I'll just move along to the center of the gallery. If there's anyone here that would like to speak to this application, please come forward. And I'll ask one more time, if there's anyone here that would like to speak to this application, please come forward. And I see no further comments, and I would like a motion to close the public participation. Councillor Squire, seconded by Councillor Cassidy.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
And committee, any comments? Councillor Cassidy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So thank you, through you, to Mr. Smith for the report. It's very comprehensive. It's exactly what's been planned in this area for a long time, so there are no real surprises there. I just want to comment on how the city as a whole, as the corporation, how we do these kinds of things. So I want to talk, first of all, specifically about sidewalks in the area. So about 17 years ago, I think, Mother Teresa High School was built on Sunningdale Road further to the east. And I remember at that time, mothers, parents in the area writing letters to the editor because they were in some of these newer developments. They were close enough to the school that their children didn't qualify for busing, and so they were walking along Sunningdale Road. And sometimes Mother Teresa school starts at 8 a.m. So sometimes they're walking in the dark. And so these parents were concerned about their children walking on Sunningdale Road and the traffic at that time, 17 years ago, in the dark. I think the concern is only greater now because there's been so much development up there on both sides of Sunningdale Road. And we still have kids walking along there. So now we also have bus service up there that wasn't there before. And I know, for example, coming out of Canvas Way, there is a cement pad and a bus stop, and it kind of feels like it's in the middle of nowhere. There's still a lot of green field around there, a lot of like high reeds and grass and stuff. And then this bus stop with people waiting, what sometimes feels like a highway, because I know it's a 60-kilometer-an-hour speed limit there. People tend to drive quite a bit faster than that. So I'm saying all this, talking about Sunningdale widening and how we're waiting for that to happen before a lot of these other things kick in, and including a traffic light coming out of Canvas Way. So I know that it doesn't warrant a traffic light signal at this point in time. But the way we tend to do things is we wait until the need is there. We identify the need, and then we start doing the work. So we're always a step behind or 2 steps behind. And if there could be a way that we know the development that's going on in there. We know what the plans of subdivision are. We know where they are in the process. We know they're moving along. They're not where most of these developers are not sitting on empty land and just waiting for something to happen. They're coming in, they're having meetings with staff, they're working with us. So we know the development continues to progress and we're going down the road. And at some point we need to anticipate the need for traffic signals rather than say, oh yeah, now there's a really pressing need for a traffic signal. Now there's a really pressing need for a sidewalk. Those kinds of things. So those are just my comments. I know I can't do anything right now, right here at this committee, but I know I have spoken to the city engineer. I know I've spoken to Mr. Yeoman and Mr. Kotsafas and all the different people at city staff. And everybody recognizes a need for us to do things just a little bit differently, just to be a little bit more proactive rather than reactive. And so I'm very supportive of this development taking place here. There's a lot more to come, and I'm hoping that we can move to that more proactive way of doing things.
Thank you, Councillor Cassidy. I hear your concern loud and clear. Thank you for those comments. Thank you, Councillor Squire, for moving the recommendation, and seconded by Councillor Cassidy. Counselor Squire?
I voted twice. I like that, that's great.
Counselor Squire votes yea. I think we've just got a slight problem here with our system. Oh, I think it's working now.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Thank you. Moving along now to our next public participation meeting, which is another draft plan of vacant land condominium. This one is on 2626 Sheffield Boulevard. I need a motion to open the public participation meeting. Councillor Squires, seconded by Councillor Cassidy.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Thank you. And I know staff has a presentation. Welcome, Mr. Mottram.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is an application by Sifton Properties Limited for a site in the Victoria on the River subdivision. It is 2626 Sheffield Boulevard. And the proposal is for approval of a draft plan of vacant land condominium. The proposed condo development would consist of 44 cluster townhouse units. And the development here within a registered plan of subdivision represents a future development block within that subdivision plan. So it has been planned as part of the previous draft plan approvals and registration for cluster housing. It is a approximately 8-hectare area in site with 60 meters of frontage and 130 meters of depth. The surrounding properties consist of a neighborhood park to the east as well as to the north. There is vacant land for future development further to the south, and there's presently a condominium of residential cluster detached housings opposite the site across Sheffield Boulevard to the west. So the general location here of the subdivision site in this block is north of Commissioners Road East and west of Hamilton Road in that quadrant of the city. The London plan designates this site for neighborhoods, as well as in the current official plan designation, it is designated for multifamily medium-density residential. And the zoning is a combined zone that allows for a range of medium-density uses. R5, R6, R7, and R8 would allow for a range of cluster detached, semi-detached townhouses, stacked townhouses, and low-rise apartment buildings. The notice of application has been circulated for this condo development, but there were no replies received from the public. This is the proposed draft plan of vacant land condominium as it would be laid out, identifying the condo vacant land units, as well as the common elements would consist of the main access driveways and internal circulation areas and visitor parking. An application for site plan approval has also been received, and the application site plan has been accepted and is presently being finalized. But this is the site plan, and it gives you an idea as well of the arrangement of the units on the site. So these would be townhouse units that are attached side by side, as well as a number of blocks of units that would also be attached back to back. And so it enables for a very strong strong, street-oriented, and front-facing units to the public realm, at least to the streetscape. There is a public realm component being the neighborhood parks to the east. And the challenge that we had run into as part of the site plan and the grading plans was just that, a very change in topography there. And so to address the grading challenges, a portion of that easterly property line will require a retaining wall with a ornamental metal fence on top of the retaining wall for safety. However, there still is good exposure and orientation to the park on the north end of that condo block. So the recommendation for the Planning and Environment Committee is to consider any issues or concerns raised at the public meeting and to relate these concerns to the approval authority for this application.
Thank you. Are there any technical questions of the committee? Welcome, Councillor Turner. I see none. I'd like to go to the applicant.
Maureen Zenti from Sifton Properties, and we are in agreement with the staff recommendation.
Thank you. Any questions of the applicant? I see none. I'd like to go to the public now. And I'd like to start here on my left side. If there's anyone here that would like to speak to this application, please come forward. We do have two microphones, just stating your name and address if you wish. And I'd like to go here to the center. If there's anyone here that would like to speak to this application, please come forward. And I'll ask one more time, if there's anyone here that would like to speak to this application. And I would like to now close the public participation. I need a motion. Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Squire.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
I'd like to go to the committee. Any comments or a motion to accept the vacant land condominium proposal? I have a motion by Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Deputy Mayor Helmer. And with that, we can vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
And moving along this evening to 3.5, another public participation meeting. This is the application at 1395 Riverbend Road. It's a zoning bylaw amendment. And I need a motion to open up the public participation meeting made by Councillor Cassidy and seconded by Councillor Turner.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
And again, welcome back, Mr. Mottram. If you have a presentation, thank you.
Again, thank you, Madam Chairman. This application is for a zoning bylaw amendment, and it is located in another area of the city at 1395 Riverbend Road in the West 5 area that is currently under development by Sifton Properties Limited, who are the applicant. The requested zone changes to permit development of a senior citizens apartment building and retirement residence on the easterly portion of the site, and for future townhomes on the westerly portion of the site, which is located on Riverbend Road at the southwest corner of Shore Road. It is currently a vacant development site with approximately 57 meters of frontage and 220 meters of depth. It's approximately 1.5 hectares in area. Surrounding uses include a elementary school to the north, along with a neighborhood park and single detached dwellings along to the north of Shore Road along Riverbend Road. Lands to the south are vacant and are slated for future development as part of the West 5 planning. And to the east are townhouses that are under development and approaching completion, townhouses and stacked townhouses, and vacant lands to the west. The London plan identifies the neighborhood's place type as being the designation here. The 1989 official plan that identifies it as multifamily, medium density residential, as well as overlapping both the London plan and the official plan is the West 5 specific area policies. And the zoning that's currently in place is a compound zoning of R5, R6, and R7, which of course that zoning allows for medium density housing in a range of single detached and semi-detached to townhouses and stacked townhouses, continuum of care facilities and nursing homes, and low-rise apartment buildings. This is actually a revised application. The original application has been brought forward to this committee, and that was back in October. So the revisions have been made in accordance with council resolution from that October meeting was that staff review with the applicant their requests for increasing the density for senior citizens apartment building and a retirement home residential facility. So the only thing that would have changed is the number of units and the number of beds, as well as increasing the height by 1 story. Otherwise, the other special provisions that have been requested, nothing has changed there with respect to front and exterior side yards, lot coverage, and the parking. And the application, notice of application was circulated to the public. On this round, there was no replies received. The form and basic configuration of the 2 wings of the facility also has not changed. The westerly wing, or identified here as phase 1, would be the seniors. That would be the senior citizens apartment building, retirement apartments, and by increasing the height from 6 to 7 stories to 7 and a partial 8th story, that would enable the developer to increase the number of apartment units here by maximum of 15 units. So the increase in the density would be from a maximum of 100 units. Now in this application, they're requesting 115 apartment units. That would apply to phase 1. Phase 2 would increase from, and this is the retirement lodge, this would increase from 125 beds to 150 beds total. There were issues that were raised by the public in the first round of consultation, including issues with traffic on Shore Road because of the elementary school across the street, especially during the morning drop-off and afternoon pickup times. And so those concerns were addressed as part of the site plan here. The main access off of Shore Road would lead to the front entrance of the building, but it would be a one-way circulation. In other words, you're going in to the site in a driveway, which would be opposite the main vehicular access to the school site on the north side of the road, and that would provide you with access to the front entrances to the building as well as to the on-site visitor parking spaces. And then a second access, which would be an out only and a narrower driveway access further to the east along Shore Road. But well, there is some visitor parking provided and as well as handicap parking provided on the surface here. The bulk of the parking is to be provided underground, and it would be accessed by a private access driveway off of Riverbend Road. So the parking spaces don't change. They'll be able to meet the required parking and so in the zoning bylaw, a minimum of 123 parking spaces are going to be required. I think they're providing upwards of about 135 parking spaces total. Concerns were raised about the building height, and the applicant's architect did provide shadow studies, and so this is a demonstration of the shadow studies where they've included the shadowing effects of both the original concept plan of the 6 to 7 story building, and they've also identified the difference between that and increasing the building to 7 to 8 story. And so there is very little difference in the line of shadow at different times of the year. This would be basically the spring and the summer solstice shadow studies at different times of the day from morning through till evening. This representation of shadow studies is the fall and winter. And it's really just during the winter solstice, is December 21st, the shortest day of the year in terms of the number of daylight hours, that there would be an effect of the building on both the school property to the north as well as the residential single detached dwellings on the north along Riverbend Road. So there was based on these studies, the difference in the increase in the height that was being requested had very little impact, we felt, on the surrounding area. So our recommendation is still we'll maintain approval of the requested zoning amendment that it's found to be compatible in terms of its form and scale and intensity with the surrounding development, and the special provisions are appropriate. It conforms with the London plan, the West 5 specific area policies, and the 1989 official plan.
Thank you, Mr. Mottram. Any technical questions? I see none. I'd like to go to the applicant now. If you can please come to the microphone.
Again, we are in agreement with the staff recommendation for this application. Just wanted to add a couple of things. As Mr. Mottram mentioned, the only change that we are requesting from our original application to the revised application is the increase in the number of units. There is no change in our request to any of the height permissions. The revised number of units has been able to be accommodated because of advanced construction techniques so that the difference between floor heights is different than it was previously. So the actual number of units is still accommodated within essentially the same building envelope that we had proposed before. I think there's just a very small difference in the 7-story wings, but it's still within the permissions that we'd requested, and as Mr. Mottram indicated, there's very little difference in terms of any shadowing. There was also one thing I wanted to mention. There had been questions about where construction traffic was going to go, and the construction traffic would be from the southerly part of the site. It would be through the Linkway Boulevard and on Riverbend Road through the internal driveway at the rear of the site. There is no intention to use Shore Road for construction traffic. Unless there, there may be like 1 or 2 periods of time, there might need to be something specific, but in general, there is no intention to use Shore Road for construction. I do have our architect here, or one of our architects, so if there are any technical questions about the building design or the shadowing or anything else like that, he can answer them, or does have some graphics that could be shown, but they wouldn't really be any different, I don't think, than what Mr. Mottram has provided, because that's what we had provided to him. If there's any other questions or comments, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Any technical questions of the applicant? I see none. I do, if the committee allows me to ask a technical question of the applicant. If you could remind us why the increase in height was changed.
We didn't actually change the increase in height, or you mean from the original?
Yes, from the original.
From what we had requested at the very, very beginning. The original master plan has always shown a retirement building and seniors building of, I think it was 5 and 6 stories. When we did the original, just sort of a general calculation in terms of the number of meters per floor, the actual height of the floors is higher because the main floors are taller. And then because of the reconfiguration of the buildings, the original master plan concept showed 2 L-shaped buildings. One of them was closer to Shore Road and then the other one along the side. So the buildings were reconfigured to be more compact and to be pulling them away from Shore Road. So that minimized the shadowing impacts and sort of the visual impact. But then it brought the building height up to be able to accommodate the number of units that has been intended. It was in a smaller footprint, and so that went up a bit, as well as the difference in the floor heights.
Thank you. I'll move on now to the public, and I'll start here on my left. If there's anyone here that would like to speak to this application, please come forward to the microphones and state your name and address. And I'd like to move forward to the center of the gallery and ask if there's anyone here that would like to speak to this application. And I'd like to ask again if there's anyone here that would like to speak to this application, please come forward. I see no one. I would like a motion to close the public participation meeting. Councillor Turner and Councillor Squire seconding.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
I'd like to go to the committee for any comments. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
I just want to say, I think this is a good example of a wise referral. It's back before us pretty quickly. I was just saying to Councillor Turner that it seemed that long ago that we were dealing with it. And it's pretty remarkable the amount of extra density that's been incorporated within the same building envelope. Like the number of apartment units is up quite substantially. The number of retirement beds, it's a bit different way than looking at just strictly units, but those are pretty significant increases within the building envelope. And I just want to say to the applicant, that's very impressive. I know the whole development is leading the way in a lot of different ways, but the fact that this many units can be incorporated in to something that is in very high demand. We know that the market for this kind of housing is growing. I just wanted to say kudos for that work.
Thank you. Any other comments? I see none. If the committee will allow me just to make a comment, this is in my ward, and it is a development that is progressing very quickly and very rapidly, and really it is something that I agree with Deputy Mayor Helmer when he speaks to how effective they're able to put these extra units in and make this area I guess, be as sustainable as it is. So thank you for the work that's being done there. And I did hear the comments about the construction vehicles. I know the applicant held an open house back, I think, in the fall now, and a lot of the comments were about the traffic on Shore Road. I hear them quite often, and I was pleased to hear that the construction vehicles, especially throughout the school year, will sort of be using, I guess, the internal driveway, hoping that's going to get built sooner than later for construction vehicles. So thank you for that. That is very important to the community. You can just imagine the traffic that already exists there, and then with this development happening, would create quite a challenge on Shore Road. So thank you for that, and please just support it. I need a motion. Deputy Mayor Helmer, and a seconder, Councillor Cassidy.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, thank you. And moving on to the next item, another public participation meeting, 3.6. And this one is on 447 Old Wonderland Road. I would like a motion to open up the public participation meeting. Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Turner.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Welcome, Ms. Lowry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a zoning bylaw amendment, application Z8962 for the property municipally addressed as 447 Old Wonderland Road. The application is submitted by the owner, Nest on Wonderland. So this is the subject site. It's located on the northeast corner of Teeple Terrace and Wonderland Road South. It is approximately 0.55 hectares in area with frontages along both Teeple Terrace and Wonderland Road. And it also has a long, narrow, linear portion of the site that juts towards Old Wonderland Road. Surrounding land uses are predominantly low-rise residential to the east, commercial plaza, and more low-rise residential to the south, low-rise residential to the west, and city-owned parkland to the north. And the site is currently vacant, as you can see in the aerial imagery. So a little bit of history of this site. The site was previously subject to a zoning bylaw amendment which sought to rezone the subject site from an open space OS1 zone to a restricted office special provision zone. The proposed development at that time was a small scale office development. That application was appealed to the Ontario Municipal Board due to indecision and ultimately approved at the board in 2015. However, the final order was withheld until final site plan approval was granted. The site plan application was submitted but never actually received final approval, so the final order was never issued from the board. Therefore, the zoning was never in full force and effect. So since then, the subject site has changed owners, and now the new owner is proposing a 4-story, 41-unit apartment building. As you can see, the building is pushed towards Wonderland Road, towards the corner, and away from the residential in behind. So some photos of the subject property. The first photo is the view from Wonderland Road South, and the other photo is from Beetle Terrace. As you can see, the site is vacant, and there is some existing berming and grades on the site. So the subject site is located within the neighborhood's place type of the London Plan and is designated multifamily medium-density residential in the 1989 official plan. As mentioned previously, the current zoning of the site is an OS1, Open Space 1 zone, with the narrow linear portion extending towards Old Wonderland Road being zoned a residential R110 zone. So the requested amendment, the owner is requesting to rezone a portion of the site from the existing Open Space 1 zone to a residential R8 special provision / restricted office special provision zone, and the remainder of the site would remain R110. The requested R8 zone would permit the apartment building use, and the requested special provisions would permit 0-meter setbacks along Wonderland Road and Beetle Terrace and allow balconies to encroach 0 meters to the lot line, as well as an increased building height of 15.5 meters. However, through the review of the application, transportation staff advised that the 0-meter setbacks could not be supported. Therefore, staff is recommending a 0.75 meter setback for the building along Wonderland Road and Beetle Terrace, as well as to permit balconies to encroach 0.75 meters from the lot lines. And this would allow for door swings and accommodate any encroachments that the 0-meter setback could not. In addition, as mentioned previously, that long, narrow linear portion is proposed to remain residential R110. So because of that, the original application anticipated a rezoning of the entire site, but with that zone boundary left in place, an additional special provision is required to permit an increased density of 78 units per hectare as a result of the zone boundary. So because of that zone boundary, that portion cannot be counted towards the site area and calculated in the density. And then lastly, the application seeks to apply the restricted office special provision zoning that was previously approved by the Ontario Municipal Board in 2015. So staff is satisfied that the request is consistent with the provincial policy statement, which encourages healthy, livable, and safe communities sustained by accommodating an appropriate range and mix of residential, employment, and institutional uses. It promotes cost-effective development patterns and standards to minimize land consumption and servicing costs. It encourages settlement areas to be the main focus of growth and development, and directs municipalities to provide for an appropriate range and mix of housing types and densities. As mentioned previously, the site is located within the neighborhood's place type of the London Plan at the intersection of an urban thoroughfare and a neighborhood connector. So it should be noted that many of the policies in the neighborhood's place type are currently under appeal. So these are informative but not determinative. Included in those policies are both tables 10 and 11. Table 10 establishes the permitted uses, and for this site, a range of residential uses, including low-rise apartment buildings, are permitted. Similarly, Table 11 establishes the range of permitted heights, and for this site, the maximum is 4 stories. So given the foregoing, staff is satisfied that the request is in conformity with the London Plan. And the site is designated multifamily medium-density residential in the 1989 official plan, as mentioned previously, which permits a range of medium-density residential uses, including low-rise apartment buildings. Development in this designation is intended to have a maximum height of 4 stories and a density of 75 units per hectare. So with that zone boundary, the site slightly exceeds that at approximately 78 units per hectare. However, Chapter 19 of the official plan gives council the ability to approve minor variations from numerical requirements without an OPA, provided the general intent and objectives of the plan are maintained. So staff is satisfied that the minor increase in density to 78 units per hectare as a result of that zone boundary is minor and maintains the intent of the plan. And accordingly, staff is satisfied that the request is in conformity with the 1989 official plan. So in conclusion, staff is satisfied that the recommended amendment is consistent with the policies of the provincial policy statement and is in conformity with both the policies of the London Plan and the 1989 official plan. As such, it's recommended that the recommended amendment be approved and that council interpret the requested density of 78 units per hectare to conform to the policies of the 1989 official plan. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any technical questions? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Lowry. I have, through you, to Ms. Lowry, a number of questions just with respect to this. Obviously, this comes to us after a fairly lengthy history and several forms, and it arrives at this one now. I wasn't quite clear through the report and even through the design. I recognize they're looking to retain the office designation, but are they looking to utilize that designation, or is the building supposed to be just residential?
Through you, Madam Chair. The proposed development is the 4-story, 41-unit apartment building. In terms of the intent to maintain and bring forward those office permissions, I might actually defer that question to the applicant.
Okay, I'll ask at the time when we bring the applicant forward. Second, in comparison to the previous application that was contemplated on this site, do you have a sense of the lot coverage, the setback from the rear lot line? The concerns that we heard from the residents at that time was a question of the adjacency on that rear lot line to the homes that were on Teeple and on Old Wonderland. It looks like it's being brought forward as much as possible, but I'm not sure if the breadth of the building has increased as well to come closer. The parking looks like it's right adjacent to that rear lot line all the way through, and I wasn't sure if there was also opportunity to bring that forward towards Wonderland at the northern parking lot area that's identified in the site plan, or proposed site plan.
Through you, Madam Chair. At the narrowest point, the minimum setback between the building and the abutting residential is 14.17 meters. Now, as you mentioned, the building is pushed as far to the street as possible, which allows for a buffer between the building and the residential. Now, there is a 6.21 meter and 3.65 meter setback for a portion of the parking area and a 1.5 meter setback for the remainder of the parking from the adjacent residential. In terms of buffering and site design features that could be accommodated on site to mitigate any impacts of that distance, those are things that can be explored at the site plan stage.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair, one final one, if I might. I recognize in the report it states that a traffic study was not required at this point. By comparison to the office commercial use,
and medical office commercial that had been proposed. I think there had been a traffic study at this point versus the residential. Does this reflect a lower intensity of traffic usage associated with that site, or a higher one, or considered to be equal?
Through you, Madam Chair, this will be a lower trip generator development, and it's going to generate lower traffic than when it was a medical development.
And just final on that, just for, if it retains its residential only. If it becomes residential and office commercial, then that would change it back almost to a similar traffic plus the residential impacts that were contemplated in the previous applications. Would that be correct?
Through you, Madam Chair. So there was a previous traffic study, and what we required when that traffic study came in, that they provide an eastbound side-by-side left-hand lane to the development. Wonderland is undergoing now an environmental assessment to be widened to 6 lanes. So transportation staff does not envision that any increase in traffic will have an impact, an adverse impact on the surrounding area network.
Thank you. And if I may just, through the chair here, ask a technical question as well. It could have been answered, but I'm not sure. And it's about the footprint. We don't have a picture of this new building on the property. So I guess the question I have is the 4-story sort of residential building the same footprint as the commercial, sort of occupies the same amount of land?
Through you, Madam Chair, the footprint is similar. This proposed building is taller. The medical office proposed previously was 2 stories, whereas this is 4 stories, but the footprint itself is similar.
Thank you for that. And I see no further technical questions. I'm wrong. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I don't have any drawings in my report either, so it's, where will the entrance be for this building? Is it off of Teeple, or is it that connection to Old Wonderland Road?
Through you, Madam Chair, you can see on the screen the conceptual site plan submitted with the application. The proposed access is off of Teeple Terrace.
So would the new building maintain that right-of-way out to Old Wonderland Road?
To clarify, this proposed access, there's no access on the site currently. The access shown on this site plan is the proposed access to support this development from Teeple Terrace.
Okay, but would there be a right-of-way? Like, so I know of places in my neighborhood, for example, where there exists a right-of-way out to a cul-de-sac, and that could at some point be used. So I'm wondering, will they lose any right to have an access out to Old Wonderland Road? Or will we create, so another example is the 420 Fanshawe Park Road development. Through you, Madam Chair, there was a right to access Donnybrook Road to the north, but when we rezoned that site, we put in a 1-meter buffer so that there will not ever be access to Donnybrook Road. Is something like that contemplated here, or will that right-of-way exist in perpetuity?
Madam Chair, on page 223 of the PEC agenda, you'll see the recommended zoning. The reason that's relevant is because that little sliver of land is not proposed to be rezoned. That will retain the R1 zoning. And since they don't share the same zoning, you can't have access through that site. So
I'm concerned a little bit about the setback, and so early in the report, it talks about, transportation staff not being in support of, a 0, and they originally recommended a 1 meter setback as a minimum, and then it's later in the report that they say that they're in support of the 0.75. And I'd just like to hear from transportation staff, if there are any concerns going forward with that 0.75. There was a comment in here about, doors swinging out into the public right-of-way and that sort of thing. So would there be entrances out onto Wonderland Road or Teeple where the reduced setback is contemplated? I just want to hear from transportation staff that there aren't concerns such as the ones that were raised, because there doesn't seem to be a really huge difference between 0 and 0.75.
Through you, Madam Chair. So initially, transportation had at least 1.0 as a minimum setback. There was discussion with the developer just because of the way the building is laid out and the size of the building, and it didn't work to have it 1, and transportation agreed to 0.75. We thought this was reasonable. It's still better than 0. And we have also reviewed this with the consultant for the environmental assessment of Wonderland to make sure that the right-of-way that we asked for and the setback will not impact the plans for widening of Wonderland. So, and it was okay as well.
I'd like to go to Mr. Tomazinik as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And if I could just add to that, the other reason for that 0.75 rather than 0 is to avoid the need for easements. So for example, if there was an awning overhanging the sidewalk, it would require an easement because now you're going beyond the property line. So just that little setback negates the need for future easements.
Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want to confirm so is that 0.75 from the current lot line, or would it be after the road? Where does the road allowance and what would need to be taken when we do the road widening, how does that fit into the mix?
Through you, Madam Chair, the proposed 0.75 meter setback would be taken from the new lot line post widening.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So one final question. In the report, it says the requested restricted office zone includes special provisions to permit reduced front and exterior side yards. So I'm wondering if that requested restricted office zone, including the special provisions, was that what was awarded through the OMB process?
Through you, Madam Chair, that's correct. The previous rezoning approved a 0 meter setback along both Wonderland Road and Teeple Terrace. We're carrying forward through this new application that 0.75 meter setback for the restricted office zoning as well.
Thank you for those questions. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. Because of the way the proposed zoning bylaw amendment is written, it's not totally clear, I think, to folks how many parking spaces are required under the different scenarios. So I wonder if our staff could just speak to that. The way the zoning bylaw is written is it's conditional. It says if it's going to be 85 parking spaces or this other number, which has to be calculated by looking at the zoning bylaw. Just as an aside, because I had to go look up how to do that. I think the numbering is actually incorrect. I think it's 4.1910, not 4.910. Anyway, that's an aside. But could you give a sense? I think the range is something like between 41 and 51 spots instead of 80. And that's a big difference, and I just want to clarify that for people. If it develops as residential, how many parking spots are required? And if it develops as a commercial, medical, dental, office building, whatever, how many spots would be required? Because it is a very big difference between the two options.
So if we could get confirmation on how many parking spaces are required from staff, just to confirm, given the difference in calculation.
Through you, Madam Chair, that parking reduction for the restricted office zoning was what was approved previously for the office development at that time. We're just carrying forward that approval exactly how it was through the board. In terms of the parking that's required for the residential development, they are meeting the minimum required parking. They require 51 spaces and they're providing 60.
Thank you for that clarification. And I see no further technical questions of staff. So I'll move on to the applicant. If you could come forward. Welcome, Ms. Dornbush.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of council. My name is Michelle Dornbush. I'm the owner of the property as well as the applicant for this application before you. I've had a chance to review the staff report that's been presented this evening. We have no concerns with regards to the recommendations by staff. We're satisfied with the special provisions and the minor modifications that they've made to the application that was submitted with respect to the setbacks. And we have no concerns with that. Just to provide some clarification through the discussion and the technical questions that were put forward to staff, I was actually the original planner on file for the medical building back in 2013, 2015. So I do have that history as well with respect to the previous application. I can confirm that the footprint for the building that we are proposing is slightly larger. It's a difference of 13% lot coverage is what was proposed with the original office building. And today we are proposing a 24% lot coverage. So it is a slight increase. But at the same time, because the parking requirement is so high for medical office uses, we had previously 85 parking spaces, whereas now we're proposing 60. So that's allowed us to significantly increase the amount of landscaped open space on the property. With the office building, it was 34%, whereas today we are proposing 42% landscaped open space. So it's been an offset for the two. And we've been able to, by bringing the building closer to the street, we've also been able to increase the setbacks from the parking area along the easterly property line adjacent to the residential properties. And we've also increased the landscape areas so that there is additional buffering along the driveways further than what was previously provided with the office use. So we've definitely taken that into consideration and brought that forward in terms of dealing with the public in the residential, the comments from the residents and how we can move forward. And one other just point of clarification and just additional information with respect to the 0.75 meter setback. I'd like to point out that that setback, and again, this is an irregular shaped property. So the 0.75 meters is actually strictly just at the northwest corner of the building. And as you head further south along Wonderland Road South, the building actually does get farther away. So that was one of the things that we also discussed with staff, that essentially that 0.75 is literally at one point only of the building and then increases as it gets closer to Teeple Terrace. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them for you.
I think Councillor Turner does.
Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Dornbush. I think you answered a couple of my questions there. So 13% to 24% is getting close to a doubling. So not just a little bit more, but what's the, do you know what the difference is in the setback? You said it was a bit of an increase in the setback from those rear lot line. Do you know what the actual setback difference is between what the previous iteration was in this?
Through you, Madam Chair, are you referring to the parking setback or the building setback?
The parking setback looks pretty much the same, but I guess more the building setback itself from the rear lot line to the wall.
Through you, Madam Chair, and just for clarification, there is a slight increase in the parking setback. it's a smaller area of the property that has a 1.5 meter setback, and you can see that is behind municipal address 439. And then closer to Teeple Terrace, adjacent to the condo units at 525 Teeple Terrace, we are actually a meter. We've increased the landscape area in that region by a meter. And then our building setback from the easterly property line is interior 14.2 meters. At the closest point, that's at the closest, and it's a little bit different because of the jog in the property line. So to the rear of 443 Old Wonderland, we're 14.2 meters. In the other area, and that's kind of the only other area that I can compare because the other building doesn't have that setback. So we're looking at, it's 22.75, and that would be from the northwest corner of the condo block. So it's comparison of 22.75, and we are, I just need to add this distance up. Sorry, I don't have a calculator in front of me. We're about 20 meters, I believe, just 21 meters. Because of the sidewalk too. So 4.7. 11.7. Yeah, roughly around 20 meters is where we're at.
We just need your mic.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Thank you, Ms. Dornbush. So I think probably the easiest comparison then, based on the siting and everything, is that southernmost edge of the building as it approaches Teeple, because that would be apples to apples. So the easternmost wall at the southern edge of the building compared to the lot line of the condo corp at 525 Teeple. You said that you thought before it was 22.75 and now it's 20, so it's actually reduced. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, there is a slight reduction in the setback between the building, but again, the building is closer, but the parking is farther away.
Okay, thank you.
If I could just follow up with another technical question, is getting back to, I'm still not sure, is this strictly a residential building or is it commercial and residential?
Madam Chair, this is strictly a residential apartment building. The reason for the restricted office zone was so that we can maintain that. If in the event that there was an application or an appeal brought forward by the public on an application moving forward, we wanted to ensure that everything was consolidated because of the fact that the previous restricted office was not in full force in effect yet. So we wanted to ensure that everything was covered off together should a resident appeal the application.
Thank you. And I see no further technical questions, so I will go to the public and I will start. We have 2 microphones. Please feel free to state your name and address if you wish. And you have about 5 minutes. So if there's anyone here that would like to speak to this application, please come forward. I see no one coming forward. Anyone here that would like to speak to this application? And one last time, if there's anyone here that would like to speak, please come forward. I need a motion to close the public participation meeting made by Councillor Cassidy and seconded by Councillor Turner. Councillor Squire votes yea.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, any comments from the committee? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is certainly one of those applications in my ward that's generated a fair amount of interest. Tonight, notwithstanding the absence of delegates for public participation, I've received numerous calls on this and emails. It's been a long file, and it continues to exist in the public interest. So I think as we go forward, I see the use of residential as a less intensive use of the site. I have concerns that we're still trying to hold on to the other branch by holding on to the office space designation in the application. I can appreciate the rationale for it, but I think there's still apprehension within the community about what might happen on this spot, and whether there's an opportunity to change the application at some point down the road just because we've retained that designation. I'm not sure how that plays in with respect to the OMB decision or the held decision with respect to that office space requirement. Is it possible for us to zone the site as just and make the recommendation on just the residential, as I think it's the R8, rather than the R8 with the special office provisions?
If I could go to staff. Mr. Thomasetti.
Madam Chair, the challenge we had with just the residential zone is through an earlier planning application, we evaluated the RO, the restricted office, to be conforming with the zoning bylaw. It's also likewise consistent with today's policy framework, and so it's difficult for us to recommend refusal of that restricted office when it's consistent with the policy and was evaluated to be a good use for the site in an earlier application. And so that's the reason we recommended both, really, because there was no good reason to recommend refusal.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson, Secretary, Madam Chair. So that's helpful. As again, there's still remains challenges with the site, intensification, the adjacency, the distances. I think there were a lot of things that we put forward when we last heard this for recommendations for site plan. I was trying to pull those up right now. My apologies for not being able to do so, but I think those principles that we had put in those recommendations, I would like to see carried forward. I'm not sure of the best mechanism to do that, other than perhaps recommending a public site plan for an H5 provision on this, which would allow for those mitigative measures specifically. I think one of the big concerns before at 2 stories for the medical commercial or medical office building was just that overlook onto the adjacent properties. Now with a doubling of height and a doubling of overall footprint, that ends up becoming a bit more, I guess, closer to home, so to speak. As I said, I think residential is probably an appropriate use for this site. I think there's probably some site, I'm not going to mess with the actual site plan at this point. I don't think it would be appropriate for us to say that. There might be opportunities to bring the parking further away from the residential lot lines as that gets explored through the site plan process. But those would be the things that I'd like to see kept in mind, and I guess I would listen to my colleagues as well, but perhaps we could contemplate an H5. Maybe I could go to staff to say, would that be something that would be appropriate? Through you to Mr. Yeoman, Madam Chair.
Through you, Madam Chair, we of course would take direction from committee and council on this. What I will note is that the matters that were considered with the public site plan for the previous application will carry forward to the site plan review for this. I'd also note that we didn't have anyone in attendance for tonight's PPM for this as well. So should you feel the need for a PPM on this, we're happy to have that. However, just wanted to let you know that the matters will still be considered through the site plan review.
Thank you for that. So would you like to bring forward a motion then to have a holding NH5 on the site plan?
Madam Chair, I would do so at the appropriate time, but I've been the first person to speak, so.
All right, I'd like to go to other committee members. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that, and I remember when this came through it at the first iteration as an office building. And I appreciate it's a difficult site to plan around. I have concerns about that big reduction in setback. It's, you know, there are benefits to bringing it closer to Wonderland and Teeple and away from the adjacent properties. But then we run into issues like we see in other developments. I know anybody that drives down Richmond Street at rush hour knows some of the problems with one of the apartment buildings that's there, that's quite close to Richmond Street. And there are constant issues with taxis dropping people off, picking them up, with deliveries, and people just parking there waiting for somebody to come out of the building. I worry about that same kind of situation happening on Wonderland Road, a much busier street than Richmond Street. And it just begs the question, if we have to adjust our rules that much to reduce the setbacks by that amount, then is it too big? Are we looking at a building footprint that's just too big? Are we fudging our rules so much because we're trying to fit something into a spot where it really shouldn't fit? I don't know. Like Councillor Turner, I would really like to hear from the rest of the committee. I do note that there weren't people here tonight, but I did see these submissions from the public included with the report. So I do know that there is public interest in this. I do listen to the ward councillor and defer to him because he is the first line, along with the planning department, with Ms. Lowry, in receiving the comments and the input from the public. So I definitely have a concern about that 0.75 meter setback. I think that's really a really small number. So I'm going to keep listening.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to make a comment? Councillor Squire.
Yeah, I have to say, I mean, I've been through this exercise since I've been back on the planning committee with the managing of buildings and whether they're too big or not for a site. And I am going to respect the recommendation of staff in this particular case. It is a bit of a challenging site, but in my view, it's a site that should be developed in a manner similar to this. And I think residential is a good use. With all due respect to my colleague, I wouldn't compare this at all to the Lux building, which is a huge student building. So I don't want to make, I think that's a difficult comparison, certainly for me to make, in terms of the kind of traffic we see there and the development that went there. So I could not make that kind of comparison. This is a very busy, well-developed road, Wonderland Road, and I think this is the appropriate use for this particular site. And we are in a process of using these sites, and I appreciate that on every site, whether it's in my ward or any other ward, people have resistance to developments that they may feel intrude on their neighborhoods. But I can't see us being not consistent in across the city and saying, look, when we have this space here and we're talking about inwards, this is inward and a little bit upward. And so I'm going to be supporting it. And I take the owner planner at their word, which I will until I know otherwise, as to what their use of the property. So I'm not going to question this at this point in time. That's kind of unique to have the owner and the planner as the same person. So I'm going to be supporting it as is.
Thank you, Councillor Squire. If the committee would allow me, I'll make some comments here from the chair. And I appreciate what I've heard here. I'm very familiar with this application when it started many years ago and the concern in the community. And I can't forget that concern and how important it is to the community to have something that works. And to me, I do have concerns about the fit of this building. I hear what Councillor Cassidy is saying. It's being put in there. But I think there could be an opportunity with the holding provision for further community input as we approve this. It's one of these things that we're approving, but we're really not sure what's going to happen here. So I'm a little bit hesitant in doing so, but I hear what the ward councillor says. I think the holding provision may help having that community interaction still, especially when there's no one here this evening to speak to it, because I know it is a concern in the community about how this infill will work for that community. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
I'm supportive of the change. Really what we're dealing with is it appropriate to have a 41-unit apartment building on the site and roughly in this kind of location on the site? And I think that it's a good idea. We already dealt with the site plan for the office building. We didn't deal with the zoning for the office building. And I also thought that that was fine, although I would agree with Councillor Turner that it's a bit more intense in terms of people coming and going during the day than you probably would see with the apartment building. I think the concerns about the setback from the ultimately widened Wonderland Road, I mean, I think there are reasonable concerns, but we're not very likely to take Wonderland Road any wider than 6 lanes plus turning lanes, which is what it would be here, right? If we widen Wonderland Road, it's going to be a lot of lanes at this location. This is set back from that ultimate widening. So unless we're thinking very far into the future where, I don't know, what are we talking about, 8 lanes on Wonderland Road? I mean, that's unlikely. On the other side of the street, we'd be running into the buildings on the other side as well. And eventually the built form is going to pinch any potential road widening. And I think that that's fine for the foreseeable future, that this building wouldn't be impacted by that. So I think that's okay to have it at that kind of setback from there, although I think we have to be careful that we're not dropping buildings in the way of a future road widening. And that's why our staff are very cognizant of that, right, keeping an eye on it. I also want to note that even though the height is higher, the 15.5 meters, some of the residential buildings that are further to the east are also higher. So the site kind of slopes upwards from the road, right? And it's something like maybe 2 or 3 meters up as you go towards the existing residential. So it won't present quite as much like 15.5 meters, which I think is good. The fact that it's pushed as far as you can really towards the road, I think is an improvement, even though the edge of the building would be a bit closer. I think when I think back to the site plan comments that we heard from the members of the public, they really wanted things like the parking and so forth moved away from the fencing as much as possible. And I think that this kind of site plan is accomplishing that. My preference would be not to have another public site plan meeting. The reason I say that is we have the feedback from people who came. It is roughly the same thing with a slightly taller building in a slightly different location. I think all the feedback about buffering and everything is going to be very similar. I don't know that people are going to be interested in coming out to say it all over again. And our staff already have access to all that information, which is quite recent. So they also have all the emails and so forth that people would send in. So I think we're hearing from the public on the site plan issues. The only advantage I would see is that we'd have a very clear site plan, which we don't really have now, showing exactly what's going on. And I think people are having to base it off of what they see in the package, which is not quite as detailed as what we had during the last discussion. So, in terms of where the garbage is going to be and things like that, that were issues in the past. So, I mean, I wouldn't be against the H5, but I'm not sure that it's going to accomplish what we are hoping in this particular case.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, colleagues, for weighing in on that. I think you raised good points. With respect to the setback, the front lot setback, I think having that 0.75 is appropriate. I think the traffic situation is different because there's a very logical turnoff for entrance, and the front entrance of that building isn't on a front aspect of Wonderland, unlike the building on Richmond, which has a very obvious front as people exit out. And so, of course, you're going to get cabs and stuff just stopping on the road. I don't think that that's an intuitive behavior that would happen on this site. to happen on Wonderland. And I think that reduced setback allows for further separation from the rear lot, which is probably what I would consider probably one of the more important aspects to the site itself. I hear Councillor Helmer's points on whether we need to go through the process of another public site plan meeting, recognizing we have done this before. I think it would be really important, though, and I think one of the reflections of not having anybody here tonight, but we did get submissions and we did get phone calls, is a bit of file fatigue. This has come forward several times, and there's a bit of resignation within the community. And when I'm talking to people, they're like, well, something's going to happen. And I would like to just put forward that we are listening, and that it is really important that we hear that feedback, which is why I would advocate for the H5 process. I recognize we may not get anybody here, but I think it's an important piece from just those aspects of how do we make sure that the site itself reflects to the best of the abilities the mitigative opportunities for impacts on adjacent properties. So I would move the recommendation with the addition of an H5 holding provision.
And I would be happy to second that. Yes, if I can go to staff. Sorry about that. Mr. Thomas.
Madam Chair, Councillor Helmer was absolutely correct that bylaw regulation on page 222 should be 4.19. So if you want, out of an abundance of caution, in a recommendation, state that no further public participation meeting be required.
With the exception of the holding provision on the site plan? I'd just like to confirm that. That is with the exception of the holding. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Sorry, Councillor Squire?
Can you put those split out? Because I'm not, if they're all in one, then I'll have to vote against the entirety, and I don't want to do that.
Yep.
So if they're separate.
The clerk will accommodate that. Deputy Mayor Helmer?
Thank you. I'm going to try and clarify what is going on. That was a little bit abrupt, Mr. Thomas-Insick. So there's a small mistake in the draft zoning bylaw. And so if we were to fix it, for example, we might have to have another public participation meeting, because we say, wow, the parking requirements are different. But really, this is a very small difference. It's not a meaningful difference. That's why Mr. Thomas-Insick is saying, you know, if you're going to make this change between now and council so that the bylaw is actually different, let's not have another public participation meeting, right? So we've done that a couple of times when we've had issues like that with the draft zoning bylaws. And I just wanted to clarify that, because it's not that we don't want to hear from the public at all on this issue or anything like that. It's just that we would otherwise be required to have a whole other public participation meeting just to fix this typo.
Thank you for that clarification. And I would assume we would get an amendment then coming forward to council.
Yes, Madam Chair, we'll prepare one before then.
Thank you. And with that, I think, are we ready to vote on this motion? So we have a motion to accept the staff report only. Councillor Turner.
Yeah, thank you. Just before we open voting, I just want to make sure that the process, I understand Councillor Squire's concern. I think he probably is looking to vote against the H5 component of that. When we do this, however, the zoning bylaw that would come forward would be that zone with an H5 as part of the package. Is it possible to separate those out so that perhaps we do the H5 first and then we do the staff report, or we can do it in whatever order. I'm not sure. I'd like to be able to capture Councillor Squire's intent in this, to be able to allow him to vote separately on that.
Yes, if I can go to the clerk and see if we can put that motion for the H5 first. Can we do that?
Yep. Sorry, it's just going to take a second.
It will just take a second or two. If you can go to number 4, we have C, an H5 holding provision for the site plan be included and pursuant to section of the Planning Act, no further public notice be given with the exception of the H5 holding provision for the public site plan. Are you in agreement with that, Councillor Turner? And I would like to move forward with Councillor Turner making the motion. And if we can vote.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-1.
And if we can go to the main recommendation, staff's recommendation.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
And I'd like to go to the committee. I know it's almost 6:30, we usually break, but I just want to let the committee know that the consultant is here. He does have to catch a train, so if we can continue moving forward with the next item. Thank you. So the public participation meeting on the draft Old East Village Dundas Street Corridor Secondary Plan. I'd like a motion to open up the public participation meeting, Councillor Cassidy, and I need a seconder, Councillor Squire.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
And I understand we have a presentation by staff. Welcome.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to kind of tee this up a little bit. So this, I'd like to acknowledge everyone who's worked on this project so far to date. Ms. Carrie Killen's been the project manager for it. We also have an excellent consulting team at Urban Strategies who I'll introduce shortly. And the Old East Village BIA and residents and business owners, and as well our engineering colleagues who have been concurrently doing the east-west bikeway evaluation that feeds into this. So the purpose of a secondary plan is to provide more specific policies than what exist in the official plan, or in this case, in the London plan. So it gives us an opportunity to look at the specific context of the neighborhood and develop policies that are tailored fit to that. So this is the secondary plan area. It's Old East Village Dundas Corridor is what we've called it. So it includes properties on both sides of Dundas, as well as King Street from Colburn all the way over to Burbrook. So it actually meets up to the edge of our downtown area. So I will go over some of the timeline to date. We had the terms of reference come forward for this project last May. Since then, we've had a couple community public information meetings. And we also had the pleasure of the Old East Village BIA organizing a walking tour for ourselves and the consultants to go through the neighborhood. So with that, I'll like to introduce our consultant. We have Joe Barrage, who's a partner at Urban Strategies with us. We've had the pleasure of working with them on this project. Urban Strategies is a renowned planning firm. They do international work. And Joe's also a professor at U of T. He's a senior fellow as well at the Monk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy. He's also been the strategic advisor on a number of very high-profile regeneration projects around the world, including in Manchester, Belfast, Toronto, Singapore, and also in the other London. So with that, I will throw this over to Joe to pick up on the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, and welcome to London.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, members of council, and one of my wonderful former students, I have to say as well. So yes, what I want to do is basically take you through what's been a very intensive and really very fascinating project, because really in the Old East Village you get a whole bunch of different things coming together, and it's tricky. There's no question about it. It's figuring out how you resolve what are, we put up here, the four really big issues is how do you intensify but in a sensitive way? How do you make sure that the street is really lively at the ground floor? How do you connect to the neighborhoods, to the BRT, and to parking? And the tricky question of, you've got quite a narrow street, 20 meters, an awful lot of demands on it. How do you resolve those? So what we've been doing essentially is taking each of those in turn. In terms of the sensitive infill and built form, what you have to recognize, I think, is that there are kind of two conditions. On the north side of Dundas, you've got wonderful heritage neighborhoods, a very rich texture and fabric. On the south side, the King Street side, essentially there are real opportunities there for intensification. So what we've been trying to do is to craft a set of guidelines that can help manage those two conditions. And this is just a description of essentially where we are going to go to what particular heights. So we are very guided by those purple heritage conservation districts to the north. We recognize that on the north side of Dundas, then you want to keep a bit low. You don't want to shadow and you don't want to compete with those areas. On the south side, there is more room to go higher, and perhaps that's appropriate because obviously we have rapid transit there as well. So what we've been doing is essentially some careful looking, and these are, perhaps if we go to the bottom right, the north side of Dundas Street, buildings scaled back to the north to the heritage conservation districts, and with a very strong 45-degree angular plane so you don't get shadowing. That's that yellow triangle. On the south side, there's much more opportunity to have higher buildings. In both situations, you don't want buildings to actually overwhelm the lovely scale of the street that there is right now. So we've asked for that quite generous 5-meter setback on either side of Dundas so that you, as a pedestrian, you'll still get the feel of that. Without going into a lot of difficult detail here, we've been talking about, making sure that wind is mitigated, make sure there's proper separation so you don't get overlook, and that you've got a really interesting street relationship on each of those taller buildings. The second issue that came up that we were dealing with is making sure that you get a really animated street. It's a really interesting street, and it's an important street, and it's beginning to really get quite a character to it and quite a lot of liveliness to it. So it's very important that you don't have stretches where there isn't any retail, where the street goes dead, or where there's parking or whatever. So we have required that there be mandatory pedestrian-oriented retail uses, community facilities, institutional uses, artisanal uses along that area, really essentially mandatory from Dundas on Dundas between Adelaide and Burbrook Place, and still going on the west over to Colborne, some requirements as well. So again, that's captured in this diagram. We've got the hatched are where we're encouraging ground floor uses. So we're also, you'll see, taking down to the connections to the BRT are very important, but a solid line of red essentially from Adelaide over. The next big issue that we had to deal with was the question of connectivity. It's actually quite a solid frontage. It's interesting that there aren't a lot of north-south streets, but there are quite a lot of north-south alleyways. Now, those are in private ownership, so you can't just take them over, but it's in everybody's advantage to be able to try and soften those alleyways, make safe those alleyways, and make sure that they connect you to the parking lots behind, because there's a lot of parking in behind each of those, what you want to be a solid Dundas frontage. We also want that connectivity to the south, obviously, to hook into the rapid transit stops. So we've been hunting for opportunities for mid-block connections. As there's development, we would want the city to secure those. We think there's a whole lighting improvement and landscape improvement that can be done to make those mid-block connections feel safe, as well as signage, obviously. So again, it's a diagram, but you can see on each of those red north-south lines there, we're trying to figure out how we can improve that north-south porosity and connectivity. And make sure that those connections to the rapid transit stops are really as strong as they are. It's not a long way from King to Dundas, but you want to make it a really nice way so that people really do make that walk and feel comfortable in that walk, and so that the sidewalk is decently treated, and so there's some, where you can, there's some level of animation, retail animation on those connected streets. The last issue that we identified with is a really tricky one. It's a narrow street. It's 20 meters wide, and there are all these demands for it. There is through what I call through cycling, east-west cycling. There's local cycling. There is pedestrian activity, and you want as much pedestrian activity as you can get. You want patios, you want things to spill out onto the street. You want some landscaping to soften the street. And clearly there still will be buses on the street, which one has to accommodate. And then there's the question of parking and automobiles. It's fair to say that we've had a huge amount of debate about this issue, and I think that we've arrived at really a good spot. Through the heart of Old Each Village, we're essentially going to separate the through bike lanes so that you have the westbound on Queens and the eastbound on Dundas. So that enables us to make sure that we can get some parking on the north side of Dundas, which is, we heard loud and clear from a lot of people that that's what they wanted us to have. So that couplet is a unique solution, the Queens Dundas couplet, but I think it's rather a good solution. And it enables you, in a sense, to have your parking and your bike lane. I should say that I live right beside Bloor Street in Toronto, and there's parking on one side. It sort of alternates from time to time, but mostly it's on the north side. And after a bunch of grumbling, frankly, it works fine. And it's really, everybody's learned how to use it. So without going in detail into these cross sections of the street, you'll see what we've tried to do in these is to increase the amount of public realm. The sidewalks are narrow right now, and if you want to have some landscaping with them, if you want to have patio spots, you need a bit more space. So it's a game of inches, but we have been trying to broaden the amount of public space while still respecting the need for parking and ensuring that bike lane. So in a sense, if you want a vision of where we might end up, the closest one we think is probably King Street in Kitchener by the City Hall. Now, this is all, I believe you've got a copy of the book, and I should also credit the two folks who've been really helping a lot on this and doing marvelous work with us to put this book together. That essentially goes through all of what I've discussed in detail. I'll just essentially the vision statement, which is that Old East Village become a vibrant commercial core with a unique heritage character that serves both as a community hub for local residents and draws visitors as a distinct destination. It's very clear to me, working in other cities around the world, that these kinds of streets really do pull people in from all over. And you're right on the cusp, I think, of having that kind of street as a kind of, whoa, this is kind of neat street. And that's where you should want to end up. There are distinctive character areas. The policies reflect that, in a sense, the three parts of Dundas Street. The mandatory ground floor policy changes from within each of those three districts. The permitted heights, as I say, the real difference here is actually north-south rather than east-west. So we're suggesting higher to the south, lower and stepping down to the north to respect the heritage conservation districts. We are suggesting these new cross sections. It's east of Colborne and west of Colborne. East of Colborne and west of Colborne. I think that what I will finish with essentially is the recommendation here, which I guess which you must have before you, and we are proposing that this be received. I think the community process will still go on. There's still detailed consideration of the bikeway, which sort of has overlaps with this, but I think generally I should say I commend this to your committee, because I think it's really a grand piece of work that we pulled together here. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any questions, technical questions? Councillor Squire.
Just from a technical point of view, this whole plan relies on the bikeway and how it's been set up on Dundas Street. Another committee is actually considering the bikeway tomorrow. So what happens if the committee tomorrow says, no, we're going to change the bikeway? How does that affect the work that you've done on this plan? I want to be really clear on that, because there is another group tomorrow that's dealing with the bikeway issue.
Mr. Fleming?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think it's a great question because it's really important that those two conversations are integrated. And so what we're bringing forward is a draft plan. It's based on a consultation process, engagement process with the cycling community and the Old East Village community, as well as the general public, that's looked at both of these issues and come up with what we believe to be the best plan for both the cycling network and the land use plan. This is also a coordinated effort between our engineering group and their consultant and ourselves and our planning consultant. So it's been that coordination between the groups to come up with this recommended plan. So you'll see that tomorrow's recommendation is hand in glove with the recommendation for the Old East Village secondary plan. That said, if council goes in another direction, this is a draft plan. It's out for circulation, comment, feedback, and we can roll with that and make changes as necessary.
Thank you, and that's the first time you've said one of my questions was great, so I'm going to go home really happy tonight, Mr. Fleming.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. Just in terms of questions,
yes.
I mentioned on a previous application that there is a grade difference. In that case, I think it was helpful to the transition between the heights. In this case, it goes the other way, where the houses that are further down on Queens are generally lower than what's built already on Dundas. So in terms of the transition in heights from 8 stories down using the sort of triangle, how is 8 going to present, given that the existing residential properties that are down on Queens are about 3 meters lower than Dundas Street?
We looked at a great deal of care at what the cross section ought to be, and so there were a couple of things guiding us there. First was to look at shadow impact, and to the extent possible determine that there should not be any shadow impact. You'll also see that we had a 45-degree angular plane, and that's a very effective measure if you're having to negotiate between an existing neighborhood and a new development on a major street. That's very good in terms of the sense of overlook, and it moderates the sense of overlook. It certainly moderates the shadows. So I think that will work very well. One of the concerns we had was we wanted to increase the population on Dundas Street, the local population, because that street, needs there is a vacancy rate there. There's no question. It needs customers and it needs liveliness, and you want to have as many people as you can who are local residents walking up and down. We wanted to manage that with the minimum impact on the neighbors to the north, and that's the proposition.
Madam Chair, I'll just supplement that answer that Mr. Berridge gave. And during this engagement process, we're glad to model the topography to understand that 45-degree angle as well, and just understand how it works when we bring in that level of detail. Something that we can do internally.
Thank you. And if I may, just a quick follow-up. I know the master plan cycling group will be meeting tomorrow, but there is an engineering report out there that may relate to this as well, and I just want to bring it to the committee's attention as well. I'm not sure if anyone is here to speak. Mr. Fleming, if you could just add to that, but there is an engineering report.
So thank you, Madam Chair. We have Mr. McCrae here, and he's been leading it together with his team. And if he wanted to say a couple words through you, certainly I'd invite him to do so.
Welcome to planning.
Thank you, and thank you for the plug for Civic Works Committee. Yes, tomorrow, item 4.2 is the Downtown Old East Village East-West Bikeway Corridor Evaluation Report. And it's been mentioned in this presentation. It's been a very coordinated process. We recognize that both perspectives rely on each other. And so we've tried to leverage the two processes and get the best feedback and input from the community that we can. And as Mr. Berridge just mentioned, I think we've landed on a good spot. So the Civic Works report is focused on the roadway portion, not on the private realm. But the limits are somewhat longer and they extend further east and west. So, but the heart of it is and the focus based on the public feedback certainly overlapped between the two studies. Thank you.
Thank you. And I see no further technical questions. So I thank you again. And I would like to go to the public now and see if there's any public input the public would like to make. And we have two microphones. Please come to the microphone, state your name and address if you wish. And I'd like to go to the center of the gallery. And is there anyone here that would like to speak to this plan? I see none. I see someone at the microphone at the top.
Yeah, my name is Joel. I live at 769 Queens Ave. Just had some questions. I guess as far as housing is concerned, there's a great need for social housing. So we have a push for affordable housing. So I know that's part of the plan, but affordable housing only being 10% below market value is still really tight for people to make it if they're on any sort of Ontario Works or social assistance. So we're just curious if there's any options as far as housing is concerned. I know that you want to see development and you want to see revenue and tax revenue, but
thank you. We'll take that question into account. And when we finish the public participation, I'll go to staff and hopefully get an answer.
Okay, there were a few other, I'm not
yes,
sure.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, so there's a strong push for bicycle facilities in the neighborhood, but the theft rate of bicycles is so high that I have two bikes at home. I've got about $5,000 in bikes, and I've had about 5 bikes stolen in the last 5 years. So I don't really take my bike out because I'm so worried it'll be stolen. So some secure bicycle facilities would be a real asset to the neighborhood. If you're also looking at major changes, I know public washrooms has come up because there is a good deal of vulnerable population in the area and they don't have anything to use. So when you're out in the cold or out in, and you don't even have a washroom to use, it's pretty tough. So.
Thank you very much for those comments. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak? Please come to the microphone. State your name and address if you wish.
My name is Daniel Hall. The address is 42 Arbor Glen. I'll be speaking tomorrow night directly to the east-west bikeway, but just to sort of plant a seed, I really appreciate hearing, sorry I forget your name, but hearing his presentation. It was very well done and casts a really compelling vision for Old East, and I think that's a good vision to have. I really like Old East and want to see it thrive. I think having bike lanes in both directions is a really important piece of that puzzle, though, that when we talk about complete streets plans that we've approved already at council and on staff, that they allow for all modes and all users, and both directions of bike lanes is an important piece of that puzzle. So I'd just like that to have that on record.
Thank you. And if there's anyone else that wishes to speak, please come forward to the microphones. Go ahead. Just your name and address if you wish.
Okay, I'll just say my name. I'm Eva. Hello, everyone. My questions, well, I guess concerns are similar to Joel's, and I was wondering, just looking from not just a development approach, but a human rights-based approach to development, how, if you're taking that into consideration, I know that I read over the plan and it said eventually hoping that struggles with drugs and mental health and addictions and those kinds of things that are prevalent in the neighborhood will hopefully be alleviated. But could you maybe address specifically how you think that will happen? I'm also thinking about London as a mid-sized city and the specific demographics that we have that you're wanting to draw people into that area and infuse the area economically. But the type of city that we have and the type of population that we have, there are other options for where to go. And I'm just worried that some of the stigma surrounding that neighborhood is going to see the continued failure of businesses as we have been thus far. And as much as I like bikes, I'm a big bike fan as well. Looking at some of those concerns, I believe, I could be incorrect, that it's the highest concentration of the lowest income within the city. So when you're looking at bike removal, for example, or creating bike lanes and removing some of those public metered spaces versus a $2 parking, paying $15 or flat rates, just looking at some of those socioeconomic pieces of the demographics of who's actually currently in that space. Thanks.
Thank you. And if there's anyone else that wishes to speak? I see none. So Deputy Mayor Helmer.
A bit of a strange request. Jen Pastorius from the BIA unfortunately couldn't be here tonight because she had a death in her family and she had to be out of town. She has sent me a package and asked me if I would read it as part of the PPM. So I know it's not normal to have a councillor do that, but I thought now would be the best time since it seems like the public has stopped commenting if I could read something on her behalf.
I see no concerns from the committee. So I know you've got a number of hats, so I guess you'll put on the Old East Village hat. Deputy Mayor.
Is it possible for me to just go over there so everyone understands what, okay.
Yes, please. We'll give you a few moments to get over and put on your other hat.
Can I cut them off at 5 minutes?
You do have 5 minutes, and if you could state who you are speaking on behalf of.
Apparently there's also a slideshow. Okay, so I'm Jesse Hummer. I'm filling in for Jen Pistorius. I can guarantee you my presentation will not be as good as hers would have been. I'm just speaking on behalf of the BIA. I want to say thank you to the staff in Urban Regeneration, Britt O'Hagan, and also Carrie Killen for their work on this file. It's really important to Oldies Village that this secondary plan is done and done really well. We wanted to just start by saying doing both processes, the East-West Bikeway and the secondary plan together, has been good in some ways and difficult in other ways. And I think we've seen some of that here tonight, where some people want to talk about one thing and not necessarily the secondary plan itself. And so we're going to have some comments about both, but we're going to try and focus in on the secondary plan, the draft secondary plan. So first one, I just recognize that we're building on a lot of great work that has happened in the past. Some people who are in the room tonight have done that work over the years, including the PACT report back in 2003. And this is really building on the secondary plan, building on all that work that's come forward. In terms of land use, I want to recognize that there are already a very broad range of built form in the area. So we've got the more artisanal industrial areas that are transitioning into smaller scale production. We've got the mixed use, commercial, and then also some pretty high rise residential along King Street in the form of the medallion buildings. And so this is a process of ongoing revitalization, and we're trying to graft onto that a bit more specific the direction that's in the London plan. And we think the secondary plan is moving in that direction. This is just an example of some of the built form. You can see the newer stuff in behind what is existing heritage building stock. And I think it's important to recognize that this secondary plan is fitting in on top of the London plan and then also the McCormick area secondary plan. So we think at the BIA that getting feedback on this draft secondary plan is going to be very important to making sure that this particular section of the neighborhood works all the way down to what already exists with the McCormick area secondary plan. In terms of the public realm, again, this is an area where we're really building on work that was done in the past. On the right, you'll see beautiful mosaic that is done on Elizabeth Street. Many of the great artists in this area have contributed to the work that's been done there. And then there's a greening plan that was done in 2008 to try and work on the streetscape. And a lot of that work was put on hold as we try and figure out what's happening with rapid transit, what's going to happen with Dundas Street. But this is work that's been underway since at least 2008, which the BIA initiated with that greening plan. Because there's a lot of different demands on the street, as we heard from Mr. Berridge, and making sure that it's an attractive street that people want to hang out in a good place with a lot of street trees is important. We have seen a lot of discussion about the introduction of cycling facilities, especially protected cycling facilities, and then the bike lanes that may impact some of the parking. And a lot of the discussion at the community meetings, I just want to emphasize that, really focused on the trade-offs between cycling facilities, parking, and other elements of the public realm. And so we're going to, of course, throughout the draft secondary plan process, once this is tabled, there's going to be ongoing discussion about that, not just at Civic Works Committee, but in relation to the secondary plan as it's being finalized. I want to emphasize on Jen's behalf the importance of the connectivity piece. So this is a map that Jen has put together emphasizing the opportunities to increase connectivity, especially north-south, from the parking lots out to the street. And this is really important if you think about the transit stations that are planned along King, those higher order transit facilities, and then also how people are going to get from the parking lots out to the businesses. Right now, you'll see on the western portion near the corner of Dundas and Adelaide, there's a bar there that is going from parking lot number 2 to the street. That's actually a private laneway that's owned by York Developments. It goes to a municipal parking lot, but it's not actually a public right-of-way. So there are a number of pinch points that make it difficult to get out. And if we're expecting people to use the parking lots more, if we're expecting to have less on-street parking and more parking in the municipal parking lots, those connectivity pieces are really important. One last point I'd like to make is that this is an area that has a lot of arts and culture, a lot of wonderful heritage buildings, a lot of buildings that people are reinvesting in to bring them back. On the bottom, you see the Aeolian Hall, one of the best music venues in the entire country. On the top left corner, you see Lifespin was designated in 2017, painstakingly restored by volunteers over many years to be a really great example of what can be done in terms of heritage restoration. And then right across the street, a new development, which we've dealt with here at Planning Committee, and you can see along the bottom of the ground floor how it fits into that existing heritage. So that's already in the secondary plan, and we want to emphasize that that's really important. We know that this is the draft secondary plan. The BIA, as it always has, we'll continue to work with the community and the business owners and different stakeholders to try and figure out the best possible solution for Old East Village.
Thank you, Mr. Helmer, on behalf of Jen Pistorius, BIA Manager. And we will wait a moment or so till you get back to your other job. And while we're waiting, I would like to go to staff. I know there were a couple questions asked of the public. One of the questions was around affordable housing, social housing, how that fits into the secondary plan. I guess the concern, or if there's anything there that addresses the concern for bikes and the storage of bikes. I know that was a comment, but it was suggested again. And concerns about, I guess, the safety of drug use in the community and how that is addressed for businesses to sort of thrive, I guess, or to continue. And if you could ask and make comments.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. So in terms of affordable housing, I just want to acknowledge that there's an affordable housing development strategy project underway right now outside of the secondary plan. In terms of within the secondary plan policies itself, there are affordable housing bonusing policies, and as well as promoting density and different forms of housing within the secondary plan area that, again, allows more affordable options to be available.
Thank you. And if you could make a comment, thank you.
Sorry, I'll just, through you, Madam Chair, I'll just add on to that and try and fill in some of those other questions as well. I guess in addition to mentioning affordable housing in the bonusing policies, there is also a highlight to say that we would consider secured bicycle parking as a bonusable feature as well. So if a developer chose to integrate that into their building, we could consider that. In regards to addressing addiction and mental health and drug use in the area, there are a number of organizations in this area that are doing a lot of work on that. Even within the corporation, we have other service areas that are actively looking at those issues. You may remember the supervised consumption facility proposal that is not too far away from that we saw a few months ago, that's not too far away from this location as well, which we think would help with that concern. And in addition, we do have policies in this draft plan that relate to the public realm and improvements, specifically looking at the safety of alleyways and lighting and pedestrian scaled lighting along the roads that will help improve the safety overall as well.
And I'll just wrap up with the discussion of the cycling lanes. I think it's important to understand that there's competing objectives going on here. As Mr. Berridge pointed out, the road allowance width is very narrow. And if you were to start out with, which we normally would, the objective of cycling lanes going both ways, what you end up with is taking away opportunities for everything from on-street parking to street furniture, widened sidewalks, patio opportunities, street trees. So unfortunately, we can't get all of it in that narrow right-of-way. And that's what Mr. Berridge was conveying. And so this is a plan which tries to strike a balance between a couple of really major objectives. And that's what the couplet's all about, still providing access by way of cycling infrastructure in one direction, having the couplet move up to Queens Ave to provide that westbound route that is plugged into the overall network, and Mr. Berridge has shown how it relates to the larger network into and out of the downtown. And that moving up to Queens Ave is not really, it's a very small distance. And while it isn't perfect in terms of convenience, a straight shot obviously is much more convenient. It's trying to strike that balance, and it's understanding that cycling is important to business. It's important to provide convenient cycling infrastructure, and at the same time, ensuring that this is a prosperous Main Street with the infrastructure it needs to succeed from a business point of view is equally as important. So that's why you're seeing what you're seeing by way of the couplet. And I think that when council has that discussion as it relates only to the cycling infrastructure, they should be keeping that in mind as to how that infrastructure ties in, is integrated with the overall plan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fleming, and to staff, and to Mr. Barrett as well. And with that, I'd like to close the public participation meeting before I receive comments. Before I do that, Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you. I just want to go back to the affordable housing thing, and I guess while we're still in the PPM, because the member of Joel up there specifically said not affordable housing, and I just wonder if I could, through you to Mr. Fleming, ask more specifically. You know, there are concerns, I know, in the area with gentrification, and it was spoken to by members of the community as well, where how can we do all these wonderful things that I would really love to see continue, because it's not new. Things have been going on in OEV for a while now, and I really would like to see the goals in the plan be achieved. But there is concerns in the community that we would lose some of the diversity that is there, and that by gentrification, we would see people that are there now no longer be able to afford to stay, and this is their community and this is their home. So rather than affordable housing, which, you know, can be fairly close to average market rent and out of reach for people that are on social assistance, do we have tools? You know we have bonusing and tools to get us to affordable housing. Are there tools that this council has to see more of that mix in there, to see rent geared to income or opportunities to bring rent down to a level of affordability for people that are on social assistance?
Well, I think, Madam Chair, the right people to answer those kinds of questions aren't here. So that would be, I think, Mr. Justizia at the Housing Development Corporation and Ms. Datersbeer and her team, Mr. Purdy and company, that are right into that conversation around the provision of social housing. And certainly, this is a comment we can take back. This is a draft plan. As Ms. Killen pointed out, we are looking at the spectrum of affordable housing and even getting into those deeper affordability types of housing that you're referring to in our affordable housing development strategy. That's citywide, but we can take a look at this secondary plan and see if there are any additional tools that we should be considering to recognize the point that you're raising. I'm glad to do that.
Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as you know, the bonusing tool that we do have to allow us to set aside a certain number of units for affordable, could we, in doing that for future development, could we set the level of affordability? So one that was in the paper recently was 90% of average market rate. Could we go so far as to say, as part of the bonus provisions, we want you to set aside a certain amount of units at affordable, but at a much lower level? So rather than 90% market rate, can we as a committee and council say, we'd like to set it at 50% or lower or something like that?
Well, again, Madam Chair, I think we can look at what's possible. I would point out that two things. When you're talking about a secondary plan, you're talking about policy, and you're giving some direction to, in this case, for example, these are zoning amendments that might come forward, and we're talking about bonusing. And you have to be careful if you're too prescriptive in your policy, and if you get those rents down too low, you might end up with nothing happening. So it could really offend the viability, the financial feasibility of a project if we're talking about a lot of units at a very low rate. But again, I think this is something that we can explore further and come back with some reasonable suggestions given the nature of the inquiry and the issues that you're raising.
Okay, I would like to have a motion to Councillor Turner before we close the public participation meeting. Yes, I'd like to close if the committee will allow me. Councillor Cassidy and Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
I'd like to go to Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. I would certainly like to encourage colleagues to sort of move this forward to the next stage in the process, which is to circulate this draft plan. It's been a long way coming. This is something that got started not that long ago and is now coming forward to get real feedback on the details, right? We've had a number of points of public input over the last year or so, and people are now getting to see the sort of how it all fits together. There's obviously a separate and related issue that's dealing with that, being dealt with at Civic Works too, and we're going to be hearing about that at that committee. But in terms of the secondary plan, there's a lot of really great things in here. And so, you know, shaping the specific guidelines around the heights, for example, along the Rapid Transit Boulevard on King, on the Main Street part, these are both rapid transit corridors, essentially. And giving a clear indication that the taller buildings are going to be on King, and then it's going to step down as you go along Dundas, and then it's going to step down even more. The earlier we can indicate that to people who are thinking about developing in the area, there is a lot of development interest, as you've seen. We've had a lot of projects coming forward. There's going to be more in the future. The clearer we can be about the guidance for that in terms of how the built form develops, the better. And there are a couple parcels right now that are currently parking lots that, you know, people are, I'm sure, looking at to say, how can we build something new on there? I know that Medallion, for example, has built those 3 buildings on King Street, all very tall, taller than what's contemplated in this particular guideline, would like to build more buildings if they could. And, you know, they're looking along there to see what they can put together. I think they're looking at parcels on Dundas, they're looking at parcels on King and seeing, you know, which one of these can work. And this kind of detailed secondary plan is really important, not just for the public realm aspects we spent some time talking about, but in terms of shaping the built form in the area. And some of the areas where this plan is sort of stepping out and changing a bit from what we've seen in the past, even in terms of the community improvement plan, which is sort of the more comprehensive vision for the area that we had before this, is really that space east of the core, right? To say what's going to happen with the east of the core. And now we're saying, well, we don't have all at grade commercial all the way across, complete that street out. And we dealt with an application not that long ago here, which was an affordable housing application, 42 units, and the commercial at grade was not required. You know, if we'd had the secondary plan in place, I think it would have been caught up in that process, and it would have had to have the commercial at grade, because it would have been right on the eastern edge of that, what used to be called the Village Annex, I think. And so there's things like that, that the sooner those are in place, the better. And I wanted to emphasize too that I think the bonusing is really hitting on things that are of interest and public benefit in this area. So I think that's one of the great things that's coming out of the secondary plan, is looking at specific services, facilities, matters that actually would help in this area. Because those mid-block connections, for example, that's not a problem everywhere, but that is a problem here. And if we can get opportunities to get some of those mid-block connections to happen, I think that's going to be really positive. I know that there will be lots of feedback on the draft now that it's out. There's been a lot of feedback from the community along the way about how this is going. Now that people see 8 stories on Dundas, you know, on the south side, I'm sure they're gonna have some feedback about that. Certainly the higher densities and heights on King, I think we'll also get some more feedback on that. So this is not the end of the road for this process. I think it's a really good step forward. For those who are very interested in affordable housing and social housing, I will just point out, as an aside, 580 Dundas is the London Middlesex Community Housing Building. It's right there in the corner of Dundas and Adelaide. Toll Puddle Housing Co-op, the rent started at, I think, $597 for a 1-bedroom, and they can be rent geared income through the city, 132 units just right there. So it's not as though there's not affordable housing in the area, and it's not going anywhere. You know, that housing is here to stay. And there's lots of affordable housing scattered throughout the corridor on top of buildings and all throughout, including the new ones we've approved. So there's lots of affordable housing in the area. That is something the community wants. They want to see more affordable housing. And I think it's really appropriate that it's in there as bonusing in particular. I'm not aware of the London Middlesex Community Housing having any plans to build any new social housing on new sites. So until I hear about that, I don't think that's too much of a concern for the secondary plan.
Thank you. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Thank you for all the work. It really looks good. It sounds like there's been a significant amount of community collaboration and contemplation of all the interests and the intersection of those interests, and a question of how to treat those appropriately. And I think that really strikes it. I'm excited to hear what the community says as we put this forward out. I recognize at this point we're really just accepting it and receiving it to basically send it out into the world for comment. And with respect to the affordable housing, it's funny that this becomes a bit of the lightning rod in the discussion, but I think the comments are well heeled. Let's compare a secondary plan of similar size and similar socioeconomic realm, which would be the South Street Hospital secondary plan. And in that, it actually has an entire section on affordable housing, and this one doesn't. In fact, this one actually has one mention of affordable, and that's with respect to bonusing and the potential of leveraging bonusing for it. But in the South Street Old Victoria Hospital secondary plan has section 4.2.1, which is all in affordable housing, saying it's the objective of this plan that a minimum of 25% of all new residential development within the area meet the provincial definition of affordable. And it can be achieved by promoting higher density housing forms where housing is more affordable due to reduced per unit land costs, building smaller units where housing is more affordable due to lower development and or redevelopment costs. And it goes on and is very explicit in it. And so I see some potential for some chapter like that within this secondary plan to be more intentional about it. And the reason why for being intentional is, as Councillor Cassidy talked about, is if you create a fairly significant disparity in housing costs within a neighborhood, that's going to create a market demand on those properties, which is going to elevate the land value and decrease affordability and accessibility of existing housing types. And so there are lots of opportunities within the neighborhood currently, and that's wonderful. And I think the intent really is to try and preserve that realm of affordability within the neighborhood. And I think it probably needs an explicit statement within that talks about how we achieve that. So anyway, that would be my comment at this point. Certainly not a point to derail this. I think it would be something that would be considered as this goes forward for public consultation and input. So beyond that, I think really trying to address the cycling, the transit, the Main Street commercial, the residential, all of those interests. It's quite obvious that a lot of time was spent in these realms, and a really strong products going forward here. So, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Squire.
I don't want to talk very long about the affordable housing issue, except every meeting we have on every subject, somebody talks about affordable housing. It's like we suddenly woke up in London and realized we hadn't built enough affordable housing. So given that and the fact we've neglected it for so long, it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of time, and we're starting to put some of those things in place, the Affordable Housing Corporation, bonusing, but I don't think that derails or affects moving ahead with this plan. But I don't think you're gonna, if you're talking about social housing that's of the nature of London Middlesex Housing Corporation, and that's what was mentioned, that's a huge challenge, and I agree with Councillor Helmer, we're not seeing a plan to bring that on stream. The reason being that it involves huge subsidies from the municipality to maintain that level of housing. So affordable housing we're going to move forward on, and I expect we will, and we will continue to do that. But I think this area is absolutely unique, and I spend a lot of time there on every week. I have a daughter who works in the area. we spend a lot of time on the street. The social problems that we're pointing to in that area, I can tell you, we all know they exist all across the city. The area that I represent currently suffers an epidemic of break-ins every evening, really related to social issues, drug issues, et cetera. So I think this is a great start, and I think social issues and housing issues are big, big issues. And I think that we attack them as best we can on an ongoing basis. We use the tools we can to do that, and I think we will do better in that area with no magic bullet on the way. The other thing is that, you know, I really think the issue of the cycling is one that I want to talk about tomorrow. Yeah, I'm chair of the committee that's going to consider that issue tomorrow, so I just want to leave that one. What gets decided tomorrow will get decided tomorrow, and that will bear on this, but I just do not want to prejudge this issue. And of course, correctly, I think this whole thing can go ahead and deal with that issue down the road. But I think it again points out what we are faced every time we come to an issue in the city is some people want parking, some people want bike lanes, and it's not an unfamiliar one to us. And it's going to involve compromise, and hopefully that's where we get to. So I'm happy to move this matter ahead, and I really look forward to what we get back.
Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank staff and just say great job on this plan. I think it is a really good plan. I really do see it as a next step in what's been going on in the Old East Village for some time now, and so I want to say thank you to all the people that have been so active in the community, especially the Old East Village BIA and Jan Pastorius and Sarah Merritt and all of the people that have been doing a lot of work there and working really closely with our staff, with Mr. Fleming and your team for many years now. And this is really the result of a community that really cares about their community. They care about where they live, and they care about all of the people that live there. And so to see the comments that have come forward tonight and the comments that have come forward throughout the process, it's a real testament to that. It's not just lip service. They do care about all of the people in their community, and I'm really happy to see the plan. I'm happy to see it move forward. I really like what Councillor Turner said about having something very explicit in there, and it's fine to talk about affordable housing, and it's what we talk about, but there are different levels of affordability, and I really hope that we don't lose sight of that. I don't think we need to build, well, we do need to build, but I don't think what we necessarily have to only talk about is one big building of LMHC housing on one site. If we can help one family at a time or one person at a time, if that just means having different levels of affordability within one building, not even setting aside, 10%, let's say one unit of social housing or geared to market or geared to income housing in one building. If we can, sometimes it just means going one step at a time. And we have a really eclectic, diverse neighborhood here. And the plan reflects that with mixed use on the streets, and we should be talking about mixed income. And I know Councillor Helmer pointed out a number of affordable housing options in the community right now, and I think we can just continue with that. Councillor Squire spoke about the compromise, especially specifically to the cycling, and just like any great big project or great big idea that we have, it always involves compromise. And so we're going to do the best that we can with what we've got. We've got a very narrow street. We're going to try to accommodate as many different means of transportation, as many different needs of the community that are out there. And I think staff have really achieved a really good compromise when we have so many competing interests here. So again, through you, Madam Chair, great job. I'm really happy to see this go forward.
Thank you. And if I can have a quick question and make a comment here from the chair, I would like to just follow up with staff, and if we receive tonight the draft secondary plan here, if you could speak to how it's circulated and moved forward and when we can expect it, generally speaking, on the revised version, and what's the process moving forward with this plan?
Madam Chair. So the next step in the process is we'd circulate it as we would circulate any official plan amendment to all internal groups, advisory committees, external people that have expressed interest. I would say that we should probably see this back at Planning Committee in about 2 or 3 months with a recommendation for a final plan.
Thank you for that, and I just want to thank the public for their comments and also the committee for your comments. I could see that staff was listening, hopefully taking in the comments. I really appreciated the conversation here, and very excited for Old East. I just think this plan moving forward is just going to be creating such a community and a statement, not only for Old East, but also for the City of London. So if I could have a motion to receive the draft secondary plan made by Deputy Mayor Helmer and seconded by Councillor Cassidy. And before we do that, Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Just wanted one last thing. It was raised by Councillor Turner, and I thought it was a good point, and I just wanted to mention it. He brought up the Old Victoria secondary plan, and I would agree that there's actually some great policy in there specific to affordable housing. That secondary plan came forward before we had the London plan, and now we have some really great policies around affordable housing in the official plan itself, which are in force. So those were not appealed. As far as I'm aware, all of those policies around affordable housing are in effect right now. And I don't think we need anything beyond what's in there. I mean, I think those policies are quite good. In many ways, they're very ambitious. Beyond that in the secondary plan, or any secondary plan for that matter, because the policies are right there in the official plan, so.
Thank you for those comments. And if we could vote receiving the draft secondary plan.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
I'd like to go to the committee if you would like a break, or if you would like to move forward with the rest of the agenda. It is almost 7:30. I'll sort of look for a comment, or Deputy Mayor Helmer?
I'd like to just keep going.
I see a consensus there, so we will keep moving forward then. Okay, so moving on to our next and last public participation meeting, 3.8, and this is the new City of London Boulevard Tree Protection Bylaw. If I could have a motion to open it up by Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Turner.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
And I'd like to go back to Ms. Spence again. Welcome.
I have a very, very short presentation. I'd like to start by thanking Lynn Marshall, Sarah Rollin, our urban forestry planner, and Andy Beaton, our forestry operations manager. There was quite a bit of input on this bylaw over the last year. So just a little bit of background. Back in 2014, The urban forest, the City of London urban forest strategy was adopted with the four main pillars: to plant more, protect more, maintain better, and engage the community. And these 4 pillars are to help council reach the goal of 34% tree canopy cover by 2065. A companion document that rolled out of the forest strategy is the implementation plan, and part of the implementation plan was to review the current boulevard tree protection bylaw, and that's what we've done. Just a little bit of background. You've seen us here before talking about this bylaw as long ago as 2015. September 2018, we came back with a proposed new bylaw, and it was referred out to the Trees and Forestry Advisory Committee. And just recently, on February 4th, we had a very small report that set the date for the public participation meeting and actually provided the public the actual language to the bylaw. So just to provide a bit more transparency. So when the bylaw was referred out, it specifically went to the Trees and Forest Advisory Committee, and their comments came back that they were satisfied with the proposed revisions to the bylaw. We did have a working group and met to talk about the changes, and they were pretty satisfied with the changes that we've made. Some other engagements that we did was late last year, we engaged just different types of stakeholders with the Building and Development Liaison Forum, and we met with members of the Urban Agricultural Group. We had the report posted on our website for a couple months, and generally we received a few general comments and inquiries about the bylaw, but nothing significant. What has stayed the same in the bylaw is that this continues to be the city engineer's bylaw, and ultimately it is their discretion whether to decide to remove city-owned trees or also to plant trees in the boulevard. The scope of the bylaw applies to the boulevard and to people who are immediately abutting the property. It excludes unassumed lanes, and we also did some updates to boundary trees, to include boundary trees in the bylaw to reflect what's going on in the industry. We removed the prohibited species list because ultimately it is the city engineer's decision what gets planted. We thought that was a bit redundant. And also the consensual removal process, we removed that. What we added was the tree removal, restoration, and replanting fees. This is to capture the real cost of tree work and replacing lost canopy cover. Again, these removals that are being requested are for healthy trees, otherwise healthy trees, and that must be approved to be removed. These fees would not be applied to declining dead trees that would be part of our normal operations. The fees include the cost to not only remove the tree, but stump grinding, boulevard restoration, the cost to a tiny bit to administer costs. And there is a chart in the bylaw that shows the progression of the fee increasing based on the size of the tree, because we've taken into consideration special equipment that's needed with removing larger size trees. One of the biggest changes is that we're, as part of the replacement cost, is that in an effort to replace canopy cover loss, is requesting 1 tree per 10 centimeters of diameter of tree removed. And we've designated that at $350 per tree. And those are our main changes to the bylaw.
Thank you. Any questions? Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. So the minimum fee for removing a tree is $1,240. And, right, I'm looking at Schedule A. So for less than 10 centimeters, the minimum fine is $500. So that seems like maybe the wrong kind of incentive structure to set up. It would be cheaper, substantially cheaper to just injure the tree, have it die, and not pay the fee.
Through the chair. So the fee for removal does include the cost for a replacement tree. We haven't set the fees and fines yet. Once this bylaw is adopted, those will propose the fees and fines to the province, and they'll get set. So that's a ticket. There's two ways that we can basically cover an offense under the bylaw. One is ticketable, and the second piece is we can go to a part 2, which is a civil remedy. And in that, we may have the option to apply the appraisal method. And it would be up to the courts to decide if that's an acceptable comparison.
Just to be very clear, I'm just looking under section, it's part 9 in the draft. Penalties, minimum, maximum. So this is not the civil remedies part, which is separately listed, but just the fines. Minimum fine 500, maximum fine 100, maximum fine 100,000. So the maximum fine sounds very imposing. The minimum fine, however, is often what gets applied in these situations. They don't go for something in between 500 and 100,000. It'll often be 500. So I'm just checking about that, because my understanding, we've dealt with these fine issues before, is that they do get set, but this is sort of setting out the range from the minimum to the maximum. So I could question why we would have the minimum below what the lowest fee is. That's all.
Yes. Sorry, I may not understand. So currently, we do not have a set fine. That will come after the bylaw has been approved, and we'll propose the fee amounts to the province, and it's up to the province to approve what we will be recommending. However, if you go to 9.5 under civil remedies, we do have the option to basically pursue doing an appraised value method. It ultimately would be up to the enforcement officer, how they would like to, whether they ticket, it's a ticketable offense, or that we go to a civil route.
This is just a question, so I'm happy to wait for the public meeting to be over, and we'll get into it. And when we get into the substantive discussion, that's fine.
All right, thank you. And I see no other technical questions, so I will go to the gallery and ask anyone here wishing to speak to this. Please come forward. I see none. And I'll ask again, anyone wishing to speak? I see none. And with that, I would like to close the public participation meeting. Need a mover, Councillor Turner, and seconded by Councillor Cassidy.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, committee. I guess we could go to questions now. Comments, Councillor Squire.
Probably the most common situation, through you, Madam Chair, that I face is people have a feeling about a boulevard that it's part of their property. It's just a feeling that people have that we're faced with all the time. And often the city will make a determination that they're going to remove a tree from a boulevard, and then the homeowner gets upset and has an attachment of some type to the tree, doesn't necessarily believe it should be removed. How do you deal with that situation? Is it just a situation of education, or is there leeway there?
Through the chair, there's a notification process as far as when a tree is being removed routinely versus if it's an emergency. We act very quickly if the tree's a threat to the public. So we would act quickly in that case. But for routine removals, there is a notification process, and I believe it is on either side of the impacted property. I know that Forestry Operations has brought a couple reports back on their notification process and how effective it's been over time.
Councillor Squire?
Yeah, the one, I know I've run into a couple of situations where that situation arose, and I just want to say that the person I dealt with was Mr. Beaton, and he was really effective at coming out to a person's property and explaining options to them as if, I mean, it was like talking to someone about their child who needed an operation. And he was very good at saying, here's something we may be able to do. And very often, just that kind of contact really satisfied the person outside of the statute. So I think I just wanted to mention that because I was so impressed with the way he was able to do that, as opposed to just saying, hey, it's a boulevard, it's our tree, we're cutting it down. So I think staff and the flexibility that is shown around the statute and enforcing it is really valuable, and I really appreciated that, and I continue to appreciate it when I deal with staff on that boulevard issue.
Through the chair, absolutely, I agree. One of the biggest pieces around bylaw implementation or administration is education. That's what we want to do. We want to educate folks. We want to talk to them about their trees, have them understand why we're making the decisions we make, so that, you know, they'll understand why we're doing what we're doing.
And if I may, just following up with that, I understand one of the changes that we're making in this bylaw is to give notice to the abutting neighbors as well, which we had never done before. So there's more of a broader conversation. So thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you. And on the flip side to that, I've run into situations where people have not been happy when we've planted a tree on their boulevard. So is that going to be part of the notification to property owners? And I recognize that it's the city engineer's decision. And so what has happened in the past, and actually it was frustrating for me because I just can't understand this whatsoever, but we've planted trees on boulevards in the past, and the property owner has come home, seen this tree, and asked that it be removed, and we have removed it. And so is that sort of thing going to happen with this new?
Ms. Spence?
So currently in our forestry operations group, they do notify folks. They notify people that a tree is going to be planted in the boulevard. They have a X amount of time to opt out. But ultimately, we want a tree where it's going to be cared for, not potentially being removed. So we want trees, again, where people are going to support them, maybe water them, maintain them over time. That would be great.
Thank you. Any other comments? Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Perhaps I can try Ms. Marshall around the fees, the sort of minimum fine issue.
Through you, Madam Chair. Sorry, I have a cold, sorry. I would point out that there are various prohibitions under the bylaw. So under Section 5, Part 5, there are, I think, 5 or 6 offenses for which tickets could be written, ranging from planting a tree without permission, injuring a tree, destroying a tree, attaching objects to a thing or a tree without permission, undertaking work upon or over the boulevard so as to injure a tree without permission, hindering or obstructing or attempting to hinder or obstruct the managing director, and failing to comply with an order to discontinue activity or failing to comply with an order. So all of those could receive, charges could result from those offenses, and fines could flow from that depending on whether a ticket was issued, in which case there would be a set fine for that ticket, or if Part 3 information was laid, then it would be up to the court, up to the Justice of the Peace to determine the fine amount based on submissions provided by the prosecutor as well as the defendant. We have set out, as you've noted in the bylaw, a minimum fine of $500, and that's to try and, steer a justice of the peace to, not a $0 fine or a $100 fine, but sort of the baseline being $500. A justice of the peace, I think, can even actually disregard that in the event of, someone who's unable to pay a fine. But I would suggest to you that it's to cover all of the types of offenses, not just cutting down a tree. And that's really the basis for that. So presumably, where a valuable, a tree was cut down improperly in contravention of the bylaw, that the minimum fine would probably not be sought. It would be a higher fine, although I can't speak to, ultimately what the prosecutor would recommend in that case. And just to note as well that in addition to those fines, which are penalties, the city could go for civil remedies. So in court, in small claims court, the city could seek its damages for the cutting down of that tree, and it's potentially that the actual, the value of that tree itself could be sought in terms of damages. But again, that would be up to a court to determine what damages would be imposed in that instance.
Thank you, and perhaps I just was not understanding what Ms. Spence was saying earlier, but that was very clear, and now I understand. I think if I were to attach one of those little fairy doors at the base of a tree, for example, I might get a $500 fine, because that's like the probably least damaging thing you could do is like glue it onto the tree or something. That would be bad, but not as bad as cutting the entire tree down, and the judge can figure that out. Okay, that's why we have court system. Great.
Okay, thank you. And I'd just like to thank staff for the work that was done. I know back in 2015, it was quite an extensive bylaw, and now we're pulling it right back and making some decisions that are aligning with the changes in the fees. One of the main changes, the charges for removal and repairs, and we're also giving the engineering department the authority now to deal with the boulevard trees. So I also know this aligns more with the London plan too, so thank you to staff for the work, and looking for a motion here as we move forward. Councillor Turner and Councillor Cassidy.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
And moving along, any items for direction? Oh, we've got an added report, 5.1, sorry about that. The third report of the London Advisory Committee on Heritage. Do you have any questions on the report? Mr. Gagnon has stayed with us. Thank you for doing that. And looking for any comments from the committee. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
I just wanted to comment, there was some feedback from the Latch in this report to our committee about the Oldies Village Corridor Secondary Plan and flagging a couple of properties, and I'm glad to see that the committee's expertise is being leveraged as part of that process. It's good to take advantage of as many things as you can as you're going, and it's a good example of it.
Through the chair, and thank you for recognizing me to speak. It's not related to that item, but I just wanted to take this opportune moment to wish you all a very happy Heritage Week. Thank you.
Mr. Fleming. Oh, that's, okay. Thank you for that. Happy Heritage Week. Yay. And Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've actually got it written here, Heritage Week. Make sure to point that out. But thank you, Mr. Gagnon, for bringing that forward. With respect to the report, there, the notice of planning application zoning bylaw, this is number 3.5, refers to 2096 Winterland Road North. Requesting that Ms. Debert be advised of Latch's concern with the research and heritage assessment from the proponent in this. Through you, Madam Chair, if I might ask what the next steps are then with respect to that application, and if that goes back for modification or I guess consideration, I guess, with the application.
Through the chair, so I'll speak to that one. So that application is live through Development Services right now. So the information is provided by Latch will be taken by Ms. Debert. Ms. Dent, as part of our team, will be reviewing as well and be providing comments for the application. It'll be appearing before you. I'm not sure in terms of timing, but probably within the next few months.
Okay, thank you. And I would ask a motion to receive. Councillor Cassidy and Councillor Turner.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Thank you to everyone here. I would need a motion to adjourn this meeting. Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Turner. And thank you to all.